Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. A Wendigo is watching me. Recently, a few months ago, I moved into a new house in the mountains. It's almost always cold and I'm surrounded by woods, but I like it as it's easier to do my job in isolation with little distractions. I sell paintings and am paid a small monthly check to write poems for a magazine that is both online and physical. The new surroundings have given me all sorts of inspiration both for writing and painting. The strange occurrences started about a week into me living here. More and more frequently I'd find dead animals nearby. Not really gored or anything. Just dead. Rabbits, birds, and the occasional fox. It freaked me out, but I just assumed a predator of sorts was showing off because they felt threatened by me. I decided to always carry around a gun and a taser, just to be safe. I also decided to call an expert of the mountains and asked him to visit. When he came, he seemed worried. Now, this man was a fairly old Native American who had lived on these mountains for about his whole life, so this concerned me, knowing he knew just about everything on this mountain. He sat me down and told me a tale of a dark creature, born of hunger and cold, a Wendigo. I was skeptical. This was a creature of fiction, at least. I thought it was. He left with a stern warning to never stray too far from home without good reason, and never follow the voices of the forest, as it may be a Wendigo luring me to their feeding grounds. I spent the next few days watching the woods closely. Maybe if I got a glimpse of whatever was in the woods, my mind could be put at ease. At first I saw nothing, then I saw swift movement among the underbrush and trees. It wasn't until around the fifth day of watching, I saw something clearly, something standing upright, with deer-like legs, staring at me with pale eyes. I quickly went inside, suddenly feeling chilled to the bone. It took a bit and some self-pumping before I could go back outside to do my painting and wood watching. I found myself putting what I could see of the creature in my paintings, but I could never catch the coldness of its eyes quite right. It fascinated and terrified me greatly, but I couldn't stop. The creature got braver, showing a bit more as time passed. I could now confirm it had a large set of antlers, and its front limbs were not hooves like its back legs, but claws. It watched me almost as curiously as I watched it. I knew then that it was likely a Wendigo, one that decided to watch me, although I didn't dare attempt to approach it, knowing its curious nature might be as deceiving as a wolf's smile. Although I never verbally called it this name, I subconsciously named it Branch. It seemed suiting. He started, or I think it was him, pushing over items on my porch, like empty paint pots and small decorations, going back to the tree line by the time I come outside. It didn't really bother me as nothing got damaged, kind of reminded me of a cat actually. I began speaking to it, not expecting responses. While I painted, I would just ramble out loud, knowing he was just at the trees. I don't know if he listened, but I think he did, as his ears would face towards me the whole time, those long, slightly disproportionate ears. One day he appeared with scars, a few still bleeding. This concerned me, but I couldn't get close to him. He was an injured animal and would even more likely attack me if I got close. After a few days they healed the pale marks on his skin. This happened a few times, but I learned to ignore it. This routine went on for a good while. I watched him, he watched me, but we kept our distance. But that changed yesterday. He approached me, and I didn't even notice till I saw his shadow. I looked up and saw shaggy black fur that smelled like rotting meat. I could see his cold, empty eyes so clearly now. They were genuinely curious, but hungry. I didn't move. I froze up. I didn't even shiver. After what seemed like an eternity, he turned and headed towards the trees. I didn't dare move until he disappeared among the trees. I went inside and called the man that warned me of them. He agreed to come pick me up when we could. I'm waiting for the man to get here. Branch is staring at me through the window. Excuse me for the wait. I couldn't find much time to write after I posted. A few hours after the man pulled in the front, which, unlucky for me, was where Branch was. I got the meat chop I had pulled out earlier and stepped outside. Branch was staring through the window. When he turned to look at me, I made sure to look at his chest fur rather than his eyes, soulless cold eyes. I threw the meat. He ignored it, didn't even twitch. I started to slowly move towards the man's truck, Branch's eyes tracking me. As I moved off the porch, he started to follow me, his hooves making heavy footfall on the wood. His eyes never left me as I slowly made my way to the car. He slowly followed, staying 3 feet away, no more, no less. When I finally made it in, he was still staring, with those cold, empty eyes. The man slowly pulled out and started down the long mountain trail. He started muttering about how I shouldn't have let it get this far, as well as other colorful words and terms. Right now I'm at his cottage at the base of the mountain. I'm still shaken, and I don't know if I want to risk going back. His wife is lovely and treats me well, as far as guests go, but I know I'll have to leave soon. The man explained that the Wendigo was one well known on the mountain, known for only attacking young females, always leaving the head intact. Now this is only semi-relevant, as I am a man. But he can't explain why he's taken a sudden interest in me. Maybe he's contemplating eating me. In a few hours he's taking me back. He's given me food, a gun, several rounds, and a blowtorch. I got home an hour ago. Branch wasn't there, but my porch looked like a tornado passed, and I think there's shit by the doorstep. I quickly went inside and locked the doors, the windows. I don't think he knows I'm back yet, and I don't want him to know. It's been a few hours and no sign of him. I don't want to go outside to tidy up my porch. I'm too scared to. It's hard to swallow the sandwich I made because of the tension I'm feeling, but I have to eat. I think I'm going to take a nap after I finish it. He's here. He's staring into the windows and making distorted huffs and brays, occasionally stamping his hooves on the porch. He can't see me right now 'cause I'm behind the couch. He sounds angry. He started banging his antlers on the glass. He's trying to fucking break it. It's starting to crack. The glass shattered. My heart is pounding. My ears are ringing. I can smell the rotten meat he reeks of. He crawled in through the window. I think he can smell me. He started knocking over random things, but I'm frozen. I can't bring myself to peek. I might try to make a run for it, or I'll have to wait it out. He just went down the hall. I'm gonna go out the front and run. I don't know how far I ran, but the sun went down by the time I stopped, and the temp is definitely below freezing. Luckily, I was already wearing a heavy coat, and I found a small overhang. We'll rest. Hopefully he doesn't find me. I woke up, but it's still dark out. It's only 12. I slept 3 hours. I'm shivering like crazy, but the overhang helps a little, blocking the wind. The forest seems still. Nothing is stirring. Not even the owls are hooting. I'm gonna go back to sleep. Hopefully it's light out when I wake up this time. I woke up an hour or so ago and started walking towards the base of the mountain. My limbs feel numb, but the movement has helped. The forest is still eerily quiet, and I keep finding blood puddles and tufts of fur. I think Branch threw a massive tantrum. I need to find a house with people in it. Safety in numbers. I didn't bring the gun. I know. I'm stupid. But I just wanted away from him. I started running again. I heard what sounded like hooves, and I swear I smelled rotting flesh again. If he catches me on his turf, I'm honestly fair game to kill, even if I'm not his preferred food. I found a field of corpses. Deer, bears, rabbits, wolves, birds. Dead animals everywhere. I quickly went around it, holding my breath, trying not to puke. I guess that's why the forest was so quiet. He killed all the animals in a fit, like a violent child throwing a tantrum, a child that could easily rip out my throat and cave in my rib cage and skull. I'm seriously hoping he isn't following me. I can see houses. I think I found one of those retreats for monks or whatever who take vows of silence. I'm gonna see if they can help me. So, good news. They happily let me into a living area where I could warm up and provided food and a warm drink. I think it's just milk. They contacted someone and wrote me a note saying that someone would be coming for me to take me off the mountain. A few decided to be curious, so I explained what happened. A few wrote me off, but others gave me scared, shocked looks. They've taken me to bedroom and communicated that I can sleep until the person coming to get me actually gets here. When he does, I'm not going back. My things can stay there, as can Branch. I'll find somewhere else to live, like an apartment in a city with people. I was able to sleep a few hours before the guy came. I told him to just take me to the nearest town. I'm outside a motel right now, slowly making calls and arrangements. I'm never going back to that place with that thing. Ever. Second story. Cabin in the woods. I recently inherited a cabin from my late grandfather. Nestled deep within the woods, it stood as a rustic refuge from the chaos of everyday life. Eager to escape the city's hustle, I packed my bags and embarked on a journey to this secluded retreat. The first few days were peaceful, the cabin offering the solace I had longed for. But as the sun dipped below the horizon on the fourth night, strange occurrences began to unfold. It started with a subtle tapping sound that echoed through the walls. At first, I dismissed it as the gentle patter of rain on the rooftop. However, the skies were clear that night. As the tapping persisted, a sense of unease enveloped me. I wandered through the dimly lit cabin, searching for the source of the mysterious sound. It seemed to emanate from the basement, a place I had yet to explore. Hesitant, but driven by curiosity, I descended the creaking stairs into the dark abyss below. The basement was cold and musty, its air heavy with a haunting presence. I flicked on the overhead light, revealing a cluttered space filled with forgotten relics of the past. Among the dusty artifacts, my attention was drawn to a weathered journal lying on an old wooden table. Intrigued, I opened the journal and began to read the pages. The entries chronicled my grandfather's experiences in this very cabin. He spoke of inexplicable phenomena, chilling encounters with shadowy figures, and the presence of something otherworldly. The journal hinted at a hidden secret, something that lurked within the cabin's walls, feeding off fear and despair. Armed with my grandfather's journal, I delved deeper into the mystery surrounding the cabin. The tapping sounds persisted, growing more frequent and louder with each passing night. Sleep became a distant memory as I found myself trapped in a waking nightmare. In the darkness, I could sense the presence drawing closer, its icy breath grazing my neck. Shadows danced on the walls, distorting into twisted forms. I would awake in a cold sweat, plagued by vivid nightmares that blurred the line between reality and the supernatural. As the days turned into weeks, my sanity teetered on the edge. I desperately sought a solution, determined to free myself from this torment. Deep within the journal, I stumbled upon an entry detailing an ancient ritual, a way to break the cycle of terror. The ritual involved finding an object of personal significance imbued with memories of joy and tranquility. This object, when placed in a designated spot within the cabin, was said to ward off the malevolent force, restoring peace to the dwelling. Armed with newfound hope, I scoured the cabin for an object that held sentimental value. Among the forgotten relics, I discovered an old pocket watch that had once belonged to my grandfather. Its familiar weight in my hand sparked memories of his comforting presence, and I knew I had found the key to my liberation. I followed the journal's instructions meticulously, placing the pocket watch on a makeshift altar in the center of the cabin. A surge of anticipation coursed through me as I recited the incantation passed down through generations. The air grew thick with a palpable energy, and I braced myself for what would come next. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the cabin, banishing the darkness that had plagued me. I shielded my eyes, squinting through the brilliance. When the light receded, I found myself standing in a serene cabin, bathed in warm sunlight. The malevolent presence had vanished, leaving only peace in its wake. Now free from the haunting, I am grateful for the cabin's serenity. The tapping sounds have ceased, and my nights are filled with restful slumber. Yet, as I sit by the crackling fireplace, I can't help but wonder about the ancient evil that once lurked within these walls. My grandfather's journal now serves as a reminder of the darkness that can take root in even the most tranquil of places. I vow to keep the secret safe, ensuring that the cabin remains a haven for future generations, blissfully unaware of the malevolence that once haunted its halls. Third story. How I Killed a Wendigo. My family was shocked when we heard our Uncle Benjamin was found dead in the woods surrounding his vacation home. I didn't know him very well, as he lived far away from most of the family. So I only saw him at family meetings. His funeral wasn't a big event. There were my two aunts, Lucy and Laura, my other uncle Stephen, and my little nephew, Mikey. In Ben's will was written that I got his vacation home. I figured that it was nice to spend some time in a place where there was no distraction, as I had to study for my exams. Also, if I would rent a small apartment, I would probably have to live off instant noodles and water for a few months. The day after the funeral, I packed up my things so that I could move to my new home. The drive itself was uneventful, though I did underestimate the length of the drive. When I was driving through the woods, I thought that I saw a face or two amongst the trees, but I just blamed it on my mind for being a bit sleepy, as it was around 11 p.m. when I arrived. Once I was there, I put all the food I had in the fridge and made my bed so I could sleep. When I woke up the next day, I showered, made some breakfast, and hopped in front of the TV to watch a show on Netflix. Halfway through my show, I thought I heard barking coming from the woods, but didn't think anything of it as I thought it was coming from my show. However, the barking did not stop, so I decided to check it out. I walked a bit in the direction I thought it was coming from, but I couldn't find anything. So, I shrugged and walked back. The rest of the day was uneventful. I did, however, sort out a few moving boxes. As it was getting kind of late, I decided to watch one more episode of my show and head to bed afterwards. The next day started off normal. I showered, ate breakfast, and started to unpack a few boxes. However, around 10 a.m., I heard it again, barking. This time, I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me, as I heard it loud and clear. I directly stopped unpacking and went to investigate the noise. When I went into the woods to check out the sound, I found a tiny Labrador pup. It was covered in mud and scratches. I knew I couldn't just leave him there, so I took him home. I gave him a bath to get all the mud and filth off him, and then I took him to the closest vet, which was about 5 miles away. Once we arrived, I took a seat in the waiting room. I couldn't help but notice that the other people in the room had a small look of judgment towards me. I totally understood why, as the pup looked like he had been attacked. When it was our turn, I heard a soft whimper coming from the pup, but he did decide to walk with me to the room. After a few checkups, the vet asked me if I owned the pup. I said no, and that I found him in the woods. The vet went quiet for a second and asked me if I wanted him to check for a chip. I said yes, and the vet checked, but found no chip. So, I suggested that if he didn't belong to anyone, I could take care of him. The vet sighed and went to get the papers for me to fill in, so I could take the pup home. On the way home, I went to the local pet store to buy some toys, food, and a food and water bowl. After buying all the stuff I would need to take care of him, I thought of a name for him. After about 5 minutes of thinking, I came up with the perfect name. Winston. I called out. Winston directly jumped up from his seat and started barking and wagging his tail. When we got home, I directly put everything in place. I put his dog bed next to the couch with some toys and his food and water bowl in front of the TV. After that long day, I was very tired, so I decided to watch a few episodes of my show. When I sat down, Winston started whining whilst wagging his tail. I asked, "Do you want to sit next to me?" He answered the question with a happy growl and jumped on the couch beside me. I watched TV until it was around 10 p.m. and decided to go to bed. I decided to put Winston's bed in the bedroom next to me for the first night so that he could get used to the house. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed that Winston's bed was empty and that the bedroom door was open. I thought that he had walked through the door to watch the birds through the giant window in the living room. However, when I went to check, I didn't see him. But then I noticed that the front door was wide open, even though I knew I locked it the previous night. My heart dropped, I panicked and ran out of the door to find him. After about 20 minutes of searching, I finally found him with a leaf he found in his mouth. I picked him up and carried him inside. It was near lunchtime, so I decided to put a frozen pizza in the microwave. I was very hungry as I hadn't eaten anything for breakfast. After eating, I took Winston for a walk, but he kept on looking into the tree line, as if something were there. Each time I thought he saw something, I looked, but couldn't see anything. After about 10 minutes of walking, I decided to head back to the house. I am glad I made that decision, because right after I closed the door behind us, it started storming. The sky became a brown/yellow color, and I could see the clouds rolling over. I'd seen this weather only once before. I was visiting a friend that moved to the Netherlands. Then I first saw this type of weather. I decided to make some hot chocolate for myself and sat down on the couch to binge watch my show for a while. Winston was sleeping right next to me. After a while, I fell asleep too, but I was awakened by Winston whining by the front door. I decided to check up on him and noticed that he was shivering from fear. I looked through the window of the front door and saw nothing. I figured it was some deer walking by that had spooked the little pup. I picked Winston up and carried him to the couch so that could cuddle him to ease his nerves. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to do an early morning walk with Winston. After walking a bit, I saw a pack of deer just roaming around in an open area in the forest. This only reinforced my thought of Winston being scared from some deer just roaming around on our property. However, when we came back from our walk, I noticed something different about the front door. Scratch marks. Upon closer inspection, I saw that the scratches were massive. They were all about 10 inches long and 1 inch deep. Now, I'm no expert in forest animals, but I dang well knew that those didn't belong to a deer. I decided to call a door repairman to fix it. They arrived about 30 minutes. "Those are some massive marks on your door," but one of the men said. "Yeah, I would get something for protection if I were you," the other one said. I followed his advice and later bought a small pistol to protect myself and Winston. After I got back from the gun store, the men were already done with the door. I gave them a thank you, and they left. The following day started of normal. I woke up, had an early shower, and decided to do another early walk with Winston. I saw 2 squirrels fighting over some pine cones, a flock of birds flying in the opposite direction of my house, and I think I spotted a small mouse running through the freshly fallen leaves. However, Winston was shivering against my leg, whining. I asked what was wrong, and he basically jumped. I decided then and there to head back. I heard something growl in the distance, and another flock of birds flew in the opposite direction of the sound. When I was back on my property, I noticed something weird. My front door was ripped from its hinges and was lying about 3 meters to the left. I directly pulled my pistol out of my pocket because I didn't know if who or whatever had left yet. When I walked into the house, I froze. There were scratches everywhere. Whatever had done this had enormous claws. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the claw marks were the exact same as the ones on the door from yesterday. I also noticed that my fridge door was hanging from its hinges. When I looked in the fridge, I saw that it was a mess. All the meat was gone, and all the drawers were ripped out of the fridge. I put the front door back in its place using the tools I had recently unpacked and fixed up the fridge. After I was done, I decided to take a little break, so I sat on the couch with my drink. After a while, I moved my arm only to touch something wet and squishy. I jumped and looked at what I had touched. It was the body of a squirrel. Well, at least what was left of it. The squirrel was mangled in gruesome ways. A part of its skull was missing, its intestines were hanging out of its stomach, and its hind legs were broken. However, it didn't bleed anymore. I guess all the blood was soaked into the couch. I cleaned up the blood and buried the squirrel. I put a small stick on the grave as a sign of respect. After that, I decided it was time to pack my things. When I was about halfway done with putting everything in boxes, it was already late in the evening. I figured it wouldn't hurt to stay here one more night, but I was very wrong about that. I was woken up by Winston. He had jumped on the bed to hide with me. He was shivering and whining because he sensed that something was wrong. I stood up. Winston let out a bark to warn me. God, I should have listened. I went to the front door as Winston was looking right at it. I looked through the window and saw something big. It looked like a deer, but I knew it wasn't one. It had massive antlers and a skull-like face. And the smell, oh God, the smell. It smelled like a corpse that had been rotting out in the sun for days. When I heard another bark coming from Winston, the thing looked up and tried to smash the door with its head. I directly pulled out my pistol and fired 2 shots. The thing held in pain and ran away. After that thing ran away, I began to grab my stuff. I grabbed the most important things that I would need, picked up Winston, and ran to my car. When I opened the car door, I heard the thing let out a cry behind me. I didn't look back. I hopped in my car and drove off. I'm glad that there wasn't much traffic on the road, as I was going about 90 miles an hour. I mean, can you really blame me for it? I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. While driving to get out of the woods, I saw the trees flash by. It reminded me of the first night I got here. However, it looked much different in the daytime. It also reminded me of the face I had seen amongst the trees. I now know it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me that night, as the face I had seen looked exactly like the face of that thing. Lost in thought, I wasn't paying much attention on the road. However, I was directly awakened by the sudden movement in the trees. When I looked towards the movement, I jumped in my seat. That thing suddenly jumped in front of my car. I screamed. The creature looked at me and lunged towards me. I slammed the gas pedal and drove around the creature. It stared right at me with its hollow eyes as I drove past. For hours later, I was back in my hometown. I figured I would go to my aunt and Uncle Lucy and Stephen. But then I remembered that Mikey was allergic to dogs. So I went to my other Aunt Laura. I figured that she would like the company of me and Winston because of the sudden passing of her brother. I texted her. I was coming over and that I was taking my new friend with me. She told me that it was nice for me to come over, but then she asked me why I would drive all that way just to see her. I told her that I would explain when I got there. After about 20 minutes of driving, I arrived at her place. She opened the door and looked at my face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked me. I guess I was still looking a bit frightened after today's events. I asked if we could go inside. She agreed and we sat on the couch. "Is that your new friend?" she asked, looking at Winston. I told her yes, and that his name was Winston. "That's a cute name," she said. Then she asked why I was here and why I looked so pale. I told her everything. I told her about Winston, about that monster, and about all the weird stuff that happened. She went silent for a bit. Then she asked me if I could describe the appearance of the thing. I told her about the antlers, the skull-like face, and the smell. After I told her about it, she looked terrified. She told me that my uncle called her multiple times about a giant creature roaming around on his property, and the next day he was found dead near his vacation home. She then told me that there were massive claw marks on his corpse and that he was hanging from his intestines, which were pulled out of his stomach. I was shocked. I asked if she had a laptop or computer I could use. She said yes, and that she would go and get it for me. She came back with her old laptop and gave it to me. I opened Google and searched for the creature. After about 10 minutes of searching, I found out what kind of creature it was. It was called a Wendigo. After reading some bit, I knew that the creature that had attacked me was a Wendigo. I told Laura, and she was as pale as a ghost. We talked some more about all the events of the past week, but after about 20 minutes, Winston started whining. My aunt just chalked it up to Winston still being young, but I knew that wasn't the case. I told Laura that we needed to go, and she asked why. I told her that there was no time, but she insisted that she was going to stay. Then she looked at the window. Looking back through the kitchen window was the Wendigo. She screamed. I tried to run after her, but she was too fast. She ran out of the front door, only to face the Wendigo. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The Wendigo opened its mouth and roared. Then it unhinged its jaw and bit her head clean off. Winston almost ran out of the door, but I picked him up just in time. The creature looked at me and grinned. I could still see pieces of my aunt on its teeth. I ran for the back door and out on the street. I didn't stop running until I could taste blood in my mouth. After checking if everything was safe, I collapsed underneath an oak tree. I was woken up in the morning by Winston. After remembering what had happened the previous day, I started crying. Winston curled up beside me to ease my nerves. I'm glad you're here with me, buddy, I said. After fully waking up, I figured that the best thing to do was to go back to my car and drive far away from here. However, when I was back at Aunt Lara's house, I saw that my car was turned into a wreck. The windows were smashed, the metal had been turned into shreds, and one of my car doors was hanging loose. I checked the back seat and saw that my bag was intact. I had left all my money in the bag, so it was nice that I still had it with me. After grabbing my bag, I headed towards the shopping mall to buy some food, as I had left all my food in the vacation house. While walking, I realized that the Wendigo had most likely followed me. I decided to head to the library to learn more about the beast, mostly on how to get rid of it. When I entered, the nice librarian greeted me. I asked if there were any books about the Wendigo. She told me that she would check, and I gave her a thank you. After a while, she told me that there were 2 books in the horror section and 1 in the mythology section. I thanked her and headed to the horror section to find them. After searching for about 8 minutes, I found them. Once I was done, I headed to the mythology section to find the last book. Then I headed to the exit. The librarian asked me if I had a pass, and I told her no, but that I had money. She scanned the books and I left. I decided to head to the grocery store afterwards, as I noticed it was lunchtime already. I bought a sandwich for myself and some treats for Winston. After eating, I decided to head to the local park to walk Winston. I walked about 10 minutes until I found a bench and decided to sit down and read the books I bought. When I opened the first book, I directly looked up on how I could kill the beast. When I couldn't find anything, I opened the second book. After looking, I didn't find anything either. I opened the last book that I had gotten from the mythology section. When I searched, I found information on how to kill the Wendigo. I directly went to the page and read that I needed silver bullets or a silver weapon. I remembered that there was a gun store about 1 mile away, so I decided to pack my things and head in that direction. When I entered the store, I asked if they had silver bullets. They told me they had and that they would go and look for me. Sometime later, they came back and put a small box on the counter in front of me. I knew that it was going to be pricey, but I had enough money to buy 10 bullets. I also bought a new gun, as I figured that my pistol was too small to even fit the bullets. After I made my purchase, I walked out of the door and was greeted by Winston, who was wagging his tail happily. I told him that we were finally safe and that I was going to protect him no matter the cost. He let out a bark of joy and we walked off. After my little trip to the gun store, it was almost evening. I knew I had enough time to get ready for the fight with the Wendigo. I put 3 of my bullets in the gun and waited. After about 6 minutes of waiting, Winston started whining. I knew then and there that the beast was close. I stood up and turned off the safety of my gun. I heard the thing roar in the distance. I looked in the direction of the sound, and there it was, the Wendigo. I immediately fired 2 shots, and the beast howled out in pain, and it started charging towards me. I fired another shot, which gave me enough time to reload. I put another 3 bullets in the gun and fired all of them a second later. One of the bullets had hit its leg and another its eye. It collapsed, and it cried out in pain. Winston started throwing a barking fit, which agitated the beast more, but it couldn't do anything as one of its legs was broken. I loaded another 3 bullets in the gun and fired the final 3 shots right into its heart. It fell unconscious, but I knew it wasn't dead as I had read that I needed to cut the heart out. I grabbed my survival knife and walked towards the hell spawn. I stabbed the rest of its legs and slit its throat. Then I began carving in its chest to get to the heart. After about 20 minutes of cutting, I had finally cut out the heart. I put the heart in my bag and headed back to Winston. Winston was hiding on the other side of the rock, where I had waited for the beast. Once he heard my voice call out, he started sprinting towards me. I kneeled and he started giving me kisses. I cleaned my hands in the nearby lake and we headed towards the nearest motel to sleep. When I woke up the next day, I showered, had breakfast, and headed to the nearest church so I could bury the heart. When I showed it to the nuns there, they escorted me to a burial place. I grabbed a shovel and started digging. After about 5 minutes of digging, I had created a big enough hole to bury the heart in. I put the heart in the hole and closed it. Then I went to the nearby field to pick 2 flowers. An oxeye daisy for my uncle and a buttercup for my aunt, as it was her favorite flower. I walked back to the grave and placed down the flowers. I then went to my Aunt Lucy and my Uncle Stephen. I told them about everything. When I was done talking, they were speechless. I couldn't blame them, as I knew that the story would shock them. After they processed the story, they asked me if I was okay. I told them that I was still a bit shocked from everything that has happened. After we were done talking, they showed me the room I could stay in and then asked me if I could keep Winston away from Mikey, as he was allergic. I told them that it would be no problem as Winston was very well behaved. After we had lunch together, I asked if they had a laptop I could use. Uncle Stephen went to get it for me, as me and my aunt chatted for a bit. A minute later, Stephen came back with a laptop and handed it over to me. I then excused myself from the table and went to my room, where I began typing this story to get this message out to everyone. All I have to say is this: listen to your instincts. It saved my life, and I believe it could also save many others as well. If you notice some strange things in the woods, get out of there as quick as you can. It's hunting you. 4th story. Be warned, there are bad people who live in the woods. Have you guys ever seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Many of you probably have, but for those who haven't, it's your run-of-the-mill slasher horror flick made in the 1970s, I think. Hold on, let me check. Yeah, that's right, 1974. It's considered one of the best horror films ever made. When I first watched it, it seemed to really hit home for me, much more than it did for my brothers when we were younger. I was 11 at the time, and we had sneaked a copy of it into our house from our friend who lent it to us at the time. Now, I would have to say one of my biggest fears is being kidnapped and being surrounded by inbred, bat-hit crazy people. So needless to say, when I saw this, there were more than a few sleepless nights with my light on. But did you know it was based on a true story? Just the thought that there were real, actual lunatics like that in the world just made my stomach churn. But what are the chances that you would ever find yourself in a situation like that? Let me tell you all, and this post will serve as a warning to anyone who thinks that the United States doesn't still have its fair share of crazies. Listen to me right now. There are people out there who live in the woods. There are many of them, and I would bet that there are some that live in your state. And they are possibly the most dangerous and bat-hit crazy people you will ever encounter. They are not to be tampered with. If they find you on their turf, and God forbid capture you, then you might as well be better dead. When groups of people begin to isolate themselves for a long time, many of whom participate in interbreeding, they become something much more different than a human. Their primal instincts and violent tendencies become amplified, as well as their intelligence and empathy becoming non-existent. So, I would like to tell you about my most terrifying experience and my first and hopefully last encounter with these people. I will not give any real names or locations on where this occurred, as I fear some of you might get the bright idea of trying to find this place for yourself. So it started over the summer. A few of my friends and I decided we wanted to go on a camping trip. Weird, right? For dudes going into the wilderness with no girls and sleeping in tents? Well, we used to do this when we were kids, so it was kind of a nostalgic trip. We hadn't noticed anything when we were teenagers. It would always be an annual night of fun in the outdoors. We would drink, tell stories, laugh, cry, the whole deal. We lived relatively close to the woods, so our parents would let us go up, but only once a year. So anyway, back on topic, it had been 5 or 6 years since we last went up there. We all parted our separate ways when we went to college. We would occasionally all go on Facebook to talk about our lives. So we all finished college, got jobs, and I decided to call them up. I managed to get a hold of 2 friends, and they were both up for it. My other friend moved all the way out to Florida, and he was busy with work and shit, so he couldn't come back to our home state. We brought a bunch of gear and supplies, as well as a couple of other things like beer and food. We were ready to relive our high school days as best friends. We got onto the trail at about 5 p.m. We hiked on the trail, and I swear it was like we were back in high school. We talked about everything happening in our lives. We were laughing so hard at the college stories we were practically choking. We finally got to our campgrounds at about 8 p.m. We were all set up by 9, and we lit up the fire and cracked open the beer. We told stories for about 3 hours, and we decided to call it a night. Now, there are many rumors in my area about these people in our area who have been isolated for some time now. We had never seen any sign of them when we were younger, so we had no reason to ever be worried about them. I don't know if they relocated or moved or something, but basically what I'm trying to say is they should have never been there. They should have never known we were there. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at my phone. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and for some reason I couldn't sleep. For about an hour I just laid in the tent just staring at nothing. That's when I heard it. Not it actually, that's when I heard them. It sounded like a pack of wolves or something walking about our camping grounds. I was already losing my shit at this point, but when I really shit myself was when I realized it didn't sound like animal breathing. The way the steps were moving and the breathing patterns were just too human that there was no way they were animals. I stayed absolutely silent. There was no noise for a brief period, and for a moment I thought I was just imagining it. Then I heard whispering. All I could make out was, After we gut them fuckers, who's gonna get their livers? At this point, my fight or flight instincts kicked in. It was officially go time. I decided that there were too many of them. I swear to God, now that I'm remembering it, there must have been a dozen of them at least. I nudged my buddy to wake up. He just turned around and looked at me with eyes that told me, what the actual hell? I put my finger over my mouth and motioned with my hand that we needed to go. He nudged the other friend, and we could clearly hear them talking now. We all stayed absolutely still for 30 seconds, and I took out my Swiss Army knife. I took out my phone for my flash, and I was ready to bolt out there. Then I heard one of them scream, "Them stupids are awake." I immediately jumped out of my tent, and I got one good look at all of them with my flash. They were fucking disgusting creatures. Their teeth were all deformed and their heads were gigantic. Their ears were huge and perked up like dogs. They were all much bigger than us. I would assume they were all around 6 feet 4 inches. We left everything. We completely bolted out of the area as fast as we could. I could hear them all chasing after us for a couple of minutes. My adrenaline was at maximum levels, and I wanted nothing more than to get the fuck out of the woods. I could hear them cackling as they were trying to track us down. After 2 full hours of running downhill, we finally jumped in the car and called the police. We told them everything that happened. Here's what the cops said in response. "You must have had an encounter with the nickname for group of people. They happen frequently in this area. Just don't go back there." What the fuck? I explained to him that they were about to skin us alive, and we left all our shit there. All he could say was, "I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but I would advise you to not go back." I was in complete shock. I have done a lot of research on the group of people the officer told us about after that incident. Some of the stories are horrifying. Many cases of missing men, women, and children, all leading back to this one group of people. The police refused to infringe this group of people in fear of retaliation. There needs to be stop to this. A lot of nights I keep lying awake in bed thinking about what would have happened had I fallen asleep. I still think about it to this day. It has become very difficult for me to fall asleep after that, knowing that sleep could have let my guard down and gotten me killed. I don't know if you guys have any experiences like this. Feel free to discuss it in the comments. I just needed to get this off my chest. I haven't been the same since then, and I feel like this might add some closure. Have a nice day, everyone. Fifth story. I encountered a Wendigo while making a remote border crossing. We've got crows back at home. In my town, we see them every day. Sometimes solo, sometimes in a group. I am well aware that a group of crows is referred to as a murder, but despite this ominous label, they're pretty shy and generally fly away at the first sign of danger. But the pair of big black birds circling the point across the lake were something else entirely. I know that around the Canadian border ravens become more common than crows, and this is what I suppose they were. But these were really big, too big, possibly bigger than an eagle. And as they circled the point, the calls they made were unnerving. Nothing like the caw of a crow. The sounds were screeching, drawn-out croaks, as though to make sure that every creature on the lake was aware of their presence. I kept quiet from my vantage point 200 yards across the bay, and the travelers I had in my charge knew enough to keep still and silent. We were 3/4 done with our journey that had begun at a clandestine location outside of Atikokan. I never thought I could become a smuggler, but here I was, tucked under ancient white pines with a man and woman who were essentially strangers to me. They watched the huge birds with me, whispering back and forth in their native language. I don't know what they were saying, but the look in their eyes showed their fear. And these people have seen things in their homeland bad enough for them to leave with nothing more than a few possessions, and then give all of their money to a stranger who arranged for me to take them through the wilderness to cross the most remote section of the largest unguarded border in the world. traveling by canoe along a route that my ancestors have traveled since long before there was a border. We had crossed the imaginary line last night, and by this time tomorrow I planned to load them into a van that would be waiting at a trailhead near Ely. This was where we would part ways. For now, we were preparing to break camp at a campsite known only to me. I carved it out of the timber a few years ago, and it is able to conceal not only a tent, but a canoe as well. There's not much canoe traffic this time of year, but I was doing a final check to make sure the coast was clear when the birds showed up. Figuring there must be something along the shore holding their interest, I fished my binoculars out of my pack to get a closer look at the sinister pair. To the naked eye, it looked like a typical rocky point on a shield lake. A smooth rock shoreline gave way to a stand of sparse bulrushes with a couple of boulders. One of the boulders didn't look right. I realized that I was actually looking at a dead moose that had floated up there, likely a casualty from the moose season that ended the week before. That explained why the pair of birds were circling, and I pulled the binoculars away to study how the birds were behaving. They took turns swooping down low over the moose and then soaring higher than the treetops and letting out their disturbing calls. Then there was movement in the trees. I pulled the binoculars back up and focused in on the mix of birch and fir that was along the shoreline. At first, I thought it was a bear coming down to take advantage of the dead moose. But this was far taller than a bear. Then I saw the antlers. Some smaller trees parted, and then what at first I thought was a moose stepped to the water's edge. I've seen hundreds of moose in my time up here, but what I was seeing now didn't make sense. Sure, it had antlers, and it was tall like a moose, but it was mostly without fur, and the color was all wrong, more of a sickly pinkish gray than the dark brown you would expect of a moose. I could see its ribs, and its front legs weren't really legs. They were more like long, gangly arms that ended in long, bony fingers. Even though I was about 200 yards away, I could see the glint of fangs. It stepped from the trees to the water's edge. It paused and looked up at the circling birds. It let out a scream that hung in the air. One of my travelers let out a whimper, and I turned, put a raised finger across my lips. I knew we were out of sight of what any typical animal or person could see, but this was far from typical. I flashed back to many years before when I stared wide-eyed at my grandfather as he told stories around the campfire. Flames flickered and birch logs crackled as he described an evil spirit called the Wendigo. Many generations ago, a lost hunter turned to cannibalism to survive, and his evil deed transformed him into a horrific beast. A beast that roamed the wilds with an insatiable hunger for flesh, human or otherwise. While this story terrified me as a child, I never gave it any thought as an adult, as the elders had many tales of spirits and such. But here I was, miles from the nearest road, two strangers in my care, looking at the impossible. I subconsciously reached to feel the outline of my revolver tucked into the back of my pants. The beast had now waded into the water, and its claws began tearing at the moose carcass. It ripped off huge chunks of flesh, hide, and bone with ease, shoving them into his gaping mouth where they were crunched and swallowed. The water around the moose carcass was soon tinged red with blood, and the pair of giant birds took roost in a tall pine above the beast. The carnage continued as the creature consumed impossible amounts in minutes. I heard one of the travelers whisper Monstoro. I didn't need translation to know what it meant. They had every reason to be scared now. I've had face-to-face standoffs with wild bears, with big city gangs, with angry fathers. At least with those you have an idea of what you are dealing with. My grandfather never said how one would deal with a Wendigo. With most of the moose consumed, the monster let out another scream. I was back to looking through binoculars, which was a mistake as the beast's face and chest were covered in blood, and flesh clung to its claws. An image I will never be able to erase. Despite having consumed the better part of an adult moose, it was still gone in appearance. It took a last look around, and I stopped breathing when its gaze seemed to focus on our location for a moment. It slowly turned towards shore and then disappeared into the brush. This cued the black birds to come down for what was left. One bird rested on the moose's hindquarter and picked away at intestines. The other rested on the head and feasted on the eyes and torn open neck. After a few minutes, they flew up silently, circled over our location, and then headed in the general direction the Wendigo had gone. At least they went in the opposite direction we were headed. We sat in silence for a time, then I pulled out a map. I showed the travelers where we were, where the Wendigo had gone, and where we needed to go to complete the journey. I showed them my gun, which I had kept hidden from them until now, hoping it would ease their fears. It didn't do much to ease my fears. It was a .357 revolver, enough to stop a bear, but what would it do to a Wendigo? I suspected there needed to be some version of a silver bullet to stop an evil spirit. I gestured to them to pack their belongings, which they did quickly and quietly. I calculated that if we traveled lightly and quickly, we could be out by nightfall. I decided to leave the tent and everything else not essential. We slid the canoe down the bank, climbed in, and pushed off. The woman sat on the floor in the middle. The man was at the bow. I paddled from the stern with intensity. We had about 10 miles to the end of the lake. At the end of the lake was a portage trail of about a half-mile that would bring us to the next lake. We had done a number of portages already on this trip, and after the morning's events I was dreading having to be on foot. There was no other way out. A light wind was at our back, allowing for relatively quick travel. The man was paddling as best he could, but it was marginally helpful at best. The woman kept her head down and did not move. Usually on this kind of trip I try to hug the shoreline to keep a low profile, but now we were tracking right down the middle of the lake. I was making a beeline for a height of land where I knew the portage was, and we continued along in silence. The paddle down the long lake was uneventful, and it was early afternoon when we reached the portage. Once ashore, we took a short break and ate some jerky, and then it was time to make the portage. It would be easier now since I had abandoned most of the gear. On earlier portages, I had the travelers hide out while I scouted ahead to make sure we would not meet anyone on the trail, but there was no time for that. I think they understood me as I tried to explain the importance of moving quickly and quietly. I pointed to the trail and then to the packs and paddles. They took the cue, and I put the canoe up on my shoulders, and we plodded along through the forest. It took less than an hour to get to the next lake. There was a forest fire here several years before, and the charred remains of a few old-growth pine stood in stark contrast to the young aspen, birch and spruce that had grown in the void left by the fire. This lake was smaller, with many bays and points, and we were soon back to making progress in the canoe. 25, we came around a point midway down the lake. I looked to the end of the lake where we would find the next portage and stopped padding. Maybe 300 yards away was the remains of a burnt pine. Roosting in the tree were two birds. Big, black birds. The man in the bow saw them too, and muttered something to the woman. She looked up for the first time and stifled a scream. We had to go past them to get to the next portage, so I kept paddling down the middle, not taking my eyes off the birds. As we got closer, it was obvious they were watching us too, their heads pivoting as we passed them. I kept looking back over my shoulder at them, but they held their position. I didn't know what the presence of the birds on our route signified, but based on what I saw this morning, it couldn't be good. By the time we were at the end of lake where the next portage was, I could barely make out the tree anymore. I thought that perhaps we were in the clear, but then we all heard the unmistakable sound, the same sound we heard the birds making this morning. Even though they had to be over a mile away, there was no mistaking it. The long, drawn-out croaking continued for a minute, then it was silent again. I paddled towards shore so hard that the bow slid 2 feet onto the bank. "Go," Go, go, I yelled. The travelers seemed shocked at my yelling, as I had not said anything to them in the few days we had been together that wasn't a whisper. They both scrambled out of the canoe, grabbed the gear, and headed up the path. I again wrestled the canoe onto my shoulders and followed. We still had another lake to cross after this portage. Then it was down a creek to where we were to be picked up in a remote parking lot at the end of a forest road. We would be early, but maybe I could get a cell phone signal and get a call or text to the driver. Or maybe we could hitch a ride with a tourist. Any concerns of being intercepted by authorities has now taken a back seat to getting out of here and away from that thing that for all I knew was making its way south toward us. Since we were closer to an access point, this mile-long portage was well-traveled and we made good time. The first half was up a slight incline, then it went down much more steeply to the next lake. We reached the top and paused for a quick rest. I set the canoe down to catch my breath. The crest of the trail allowed a good view of the valley ahead. It also allowed a good view of two huge, black birds that were circling above the treetops. The woman was not able to stifle her scream this time, and this prompted the birds to start up with their ominous calls. In the distance we heard another sound. It was a scream that could have only come from the horror we had seen this morning. While I felt a certain amount of responsibility to the travelers, my concern for them was waning. "You better keep up," I yelled as hoisted the canoe back onto my shoulders. I headed down the steep trail as fast as I could, and I could hear the travelers behind me, stumbling, but not falling too far behind. With the canoe on my shoulders, I couldn't see if they were carrying the paddles. Didn't matter. I keep a spare strap to the supports in the canoe. The steep path made a switchback and was able to see that the man was indeed carrying a paddle and pack. The woman was crying hysterically, carrying nothing. The path here was steep and rough, with many large rocks and roots creating potential tripping hazards. The birds were circling overhead us now, their croaks echoing off the hillside. We heard the distant scream again, although this time it didn't sound so distant. It was not possible for us to move any faster, but I took care to be sure-footed. I could see we were nearly to the bottom of the hill. Once there, it would be level ground to the next lake, which was now only a few hundred yards away. I made it to the bottom of the hill where the well-worn path went through a series of large roots and then turned to dirt. Once to the dirt, I flipped the canoe off my shoulders and let it land on the hull. The travelers were coming up 50 yards behind me. I grabbed the bow of the canoe and started dragging it, hoping the man would catch up and grab the stern. I started to yell at the couple to hurry, but I was interrupted by another scream from the beast. It was coming from our right, and I could now hear branches breaking and what sounded like breathing and snarling. There was no reason to think that the lake would offer refuge from this thing, but it seemed like a better option than facing it here on the path. The man was almost caught up to me, but he stopped to see where his partner was. She had tripped on a root and was now screaming, not sure if it was in pain or terror. Probably more terror, as the Wendigo had broken through the brush along the trail and was now 50 feet behind her. She looked back at it and let out what she meant to be a scream, but came out as a yelp. The beast was on her in seconds, and it picked her up over its head and slammed her to the ground. The man dropped to his knees, watching in horror as his partner was torn apart and devoured. Wendy ate. I resumed dragging the canoe as fast as I could, not looking back. The beast let out another shriek. Then there was a scream that I presumed to be from the man. I tried not to think about the snapping and crunching sounds I could hear from behind me. The next lake was now in sight, and even though my entire body wanted to quit, I was now running. The shoreline was sandy and I ran right into the water, allowing the canoe to float past me. I hopped in when the back seat was even with me, and in one motion pulled the tag end of the knot that held my spare paddle in place. A few quick strokes and I was 20 yards from shore. The screams of the beast continued, and the black birds that had been watching the bloodbath from treetops now were starting to swoop around me, getting closer with each pass. The Wendigo was now on the shoreline, and it let out the loudest scream of all. It stepped in the water to its knees but stopped, gesturing with its long arms and howling at the sky. Not knowing what to do next, I pulled out my revolver. At the end of this lake was the outlet stream that would lead me to a bridge. For the moment, I felt safer where I was. The birds were getting ever bolder, and I could feel the wind as one of them swooped in on me from behind my shoulder. It wheeled around over the bow and came right back at me. It reared back at arm's length with its wings spread and its talons coming right at my face. Taking advantage of a perfect opportunity, one pointed the gun barrel at the bird's center and pulled the trigger. Black feathers flew, and the now silenced bird landed in the water and strangely sank out of sight. The other bird flew up high and then quickly descended, coming right at me. I had the gun raised, but the bird did not offer a good target, and it flew past my head. Sensing weakness, it circled around and attacked, pecking me on the back of the head with its massive beak. I had to be careful not to tip as I tried to fend it off with the paddle. More determined than ever, the bird came back at me. I fired twice, missing both times. With 3 rounds left in the gun, I knew I better choose my next shots carefully. The bird came from behind me again. This time it wheeled around quickly, planting its talons on my chest and pecking at my eyes. My attempts to fend it off with a fist were not successful, and it got a hold of my eyebrow. I could feel flesh pulling away from my skull, and I pointed the gun right at it, and even though I thought the barrel was pressed right into it, I still missed. I resorted to using the gun as a bludgeon that I slammed into its neck. This had a noticeable effect. It let out a deep croak and let go its grip. I was not watching the Wendigo at this point, focused on the dark feathered assailant. I could hear it, though, as it let out shrieks and screams louder than a siren. The remaining black bird, shook up some from the pistol whipping, flew in a crooked path now, obviously having difficulty maintaining its course. I felt confident I could take it down with one of my remaining rounds. It came straight at me. I let it peck the top of my head as it went by. It circled around again, and once more I let it get me with a good peck to my temple. It made another loop around, and I was ready when it followed the same path of attack. It came right at me, and I was looking down the barrel right at the bird's head when I pulled the trigger. The raven's head disintegrated in a cloud of black feathers and blood, and the headless body landed at my feet, wings still flapping, talons still grasping. The shrieks of the Wendigo suddenly stopped. It stood motionless, staring out at the lake, not necessarily at me. I set the gun on the seat next to me. There was still 1 round left. I used the paddle as a shovel to lift the dead bird over the side and into the lake, where it too strangely sank out of sight. The Wendigo, while still a fearsome-looking beast with its face and claws covered in blood and flesh, had lost its menacing posture. I pointed the revolver at it, right at its head. I was confident I could hit it, not confident that my 1 remaining bullet would kill it. For some reason, I thought about the old saying that if carrying a handgun for bear protection, you should save the last round for yourself. Pretty sure the old saying applies here. I lowered the gun and watched the beast. With its long bony arms hanging at its sides, it turned toward shore, and with 2 big steps it was crashing through the timber, heading away from the lake, away from me, away from my exit point. I sat quietly for a minute, trying to take all of this in. I could no longer hear the sounds of branches breaking. Was the Wendigo gone? Apparently they can't or won't swim. The ravens must act as seers or scouts for the Wendigo. Once they were eliminated, it was like a switch was flipped. I thought about the hapless travelers. I knew it was pointless to go back to where I had last seen them. What would happen to me when I left the lake? It was now late in the afternoon. I slid the revolver with its 1 bullet into the back of my jeans, picked up the paddle and headed for the outlet creek. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm. Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of Horror in Detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. I think I saw a Wendigo through the train window. It is as the title states. I am fairly certain that I saw a Wendigo out the window of the train. If that were the only event that happened, then I wouldn't have any reason to tell my story. In order to get into what happened, let me start off at the beginning of my day. It was a normal Saturday as far as I was concerned. I stayed up until about 3 a.m. playing the newest online mobile game with my brothers. Yes, I know, it is considered a sin to cheat by using my brother's screens to determine who the imposter is, but I'm not getting into that debate right now. I woke up not too long after 9 a.m., played on my phone a while, and then hopped out of bed, threw on the same clothes I had on the day before, and headed downstairs to the kitchen. I threw together my favorite breakfast food while my brothers both groggily dragged their feet to meet me. My twin brother, Gabe, decided to shower to wake himself up, while my younger brother, Zach, decided to partake in the feast of homemade waffles with peanut butter and chocolate milk. By the time Gabe was dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, Zach and I had already finished putting the dishes into our dishwasher and cleaned off the table. I had packed in advance and my train wasn't for a few more hours, so my brothers and I had pulled our phones out and began terrorizing the servers of Among Us for a little while. After we grew tired from the online insults and cyberbullying that we received for cheating, we played some Mortal Kombat on our PS4. It was a very relaxing morning, all things considered. As I prepared to collect my luggage and leave for the train station, I reiterated the food plans to my siblings. The roast is in the slow cooker. All you'll have to do is clean up. It is going to be finished at 6 today, and if you aren't sure if it's done, then shoot me a picture. I continued speaking over my Gabe's attempts of assuring me that they'd be fine without me. Remember, tomorrow is oven-baked chicken fingers and fries. After school Monday is burgers, and you can order anything you want for Tuesday and pay a tip. I rushed my sentence as Gabe held the front door of our tiny rented house open for me. Chrissy, we'll be fine, okay? Chill out, okay? Gabe chuckled to himself. You're right. You'll be fine. Do your homework. I love you guys. See you Wednesday. I called to them as I headed down the paved driveway and towards the bus stop down the road. Hasta la vista, baby. As Zach yelled my favorite movie reference of all time at me, I couldn't help but smile. They'll be fine. I raised them well, I thought to myself. I looked at them waving in the open front door and gave them a very flat and stern expression. I'll be back. I deepened my voice as best as possible before smiling and heading back towards the bus stop. My parents were extremely busy people all our lives. Gabe was born with a learning disability and required more attention from my parents than I needed. I had to grow up and mature faster to be able to take care of Gabe, as our mother was a full-time principal in our local school and a part-time student tutor, while my father worked as a warehouse manager full-time and was often working the midnight shifts. He worked those shifts due to the employees' reputations to be unproductive. He always said he needed to straighten them out. My father would sleep all day and my mother would work all day. I would always prepare Gabe's lunches and walk him to school, walk him home, and make him dinner. I helped him with his homework. I read him bedtime stories. I tucked him into bed. I was always there for him. Zach was born a week before my 9th birthday with Gabe. By now, Gabe had quickly matured, surprising everyone. He was potentially even smarter and more socially acceptable than I was, though he didn't have the same parenting skills that I had developed and therefore wasn't entirely confident in even turning on an oven or setting a microwave timer. Anyways, by the time Zach came around, I was well aware that I'd have to raise him too. I so desperately wanted my mom and dad to be real parents for little Zach, to be there for him and be what Gabe and I never had. But I knew deep down inside that that wouldn't happen. By the time I was Gabe and I were 18 and Zach had just turned 9, the three of us moved out and into our own apartment. I wasn't even sure that our parents would notice Zach's absence, to be honest. They had no issues with us all moving in together. They said to me themselves that they knew Zach was better off with us than them. They said he was never supposed to be, which entirely angered me. Because of this, Gabe and I started to call Zach our miracle brother. Despite our age gap, the three of us were extremely close with one another. It was us three against the world. Nobody would change that. Then about a year ago, I fell in love with my old high school crush. His name is Brian. We were always close friends since grade 9, but as high school came to a close and we parted ways for university, we confessed our love. It was a very corny movie moment to me. Even through long distance, we made our relationship work. Gabe and Zach were obviously jealous that Brian was taking all of my attention. They were afraid that Brian was going to take me away from them. All that aside, they liked my boyfriend. They were all friendly and had good laughs together. They were happy for us. So here I am, at the train station awaiting my train to my boyfriend on our first-year anniversary. I anxiously awaited the train, wondering with me when I got back. Maybe they were mad already. Or maybe they aren't upset at all. I talked myself into thinking that I was doing the right thing, even though my stomach was turning violently. I was feeling very nauseous. It had nothing to do with anything I ate. I had a horrible feeling. Something inside me was telling me that something bad was going to happen. I didn't listen to it at the time. I thought it was all just the nerves of traveling. I was just too excited to see Brian. The train was quite long. It went from my small little town of southern Ontario to the northern and frigid climate that is stereotypically portrayed as all of Canada. Overall, the trip to Brian's apartments was close to 12 hours. However, that includes the train ride along with the bus and the drive that Brian has to take from his apartment to where I arrive on the train and back to his apartment. I had boarded the train and been seated when one of the train staff members asked to scan my ticket. I quickly apologized for not being prepared and dug through my luggage to find my ticket. After ensuring that I was settled and asking if I had wanted any food or drink for the ride, the staff member had moved along down the aisle. I looked around the car, noticing only 3 other passengers before pulling out my laptop from my bag and popping my headphones into my ears. I sent a text to my parents informing them of my absence from my hometown for the next few days and threw on some YouTube. Gaming channels were always a favorite, but recently Gabe had gotten me hooked onto a game theory channel. I could sit there for hours watching the different conspiracy theories about video game lore, and for the first half of my trip, that's exactly what I did. The early winter sunset filled the skies with orange and pink highlights as I had decided to put my laptop away and watch the window with my music playlist on. I had always enjoyed listening to music on long trips, especially across the country. I tried to imagine cheesy movie scenes taking place in the open fields with slow songs playing and faceless couples slow dancing. Within about an hour after I first peered out my window, the snow had begun. At first, it was a light flurry, hardly visible as the train sped along the tracks. Eventually, it was blizzarding. Simply looking outside gave me chills, as I never enjoyed being in the snow. Snow is pretty, but from afar, I'd always say. I shivered underneath my thick leather jacket as the train came to a slow stop in a remote northern town. This was not my stop, as the train station itself was visibly the largest building in the entire town. Anyone could stand on one end of the town and see the other side down the road, even in the blizzard-like conditions that were present. As the train waited, I kept my eyes focused outside my window. No passengers had left the car, and no additional passengers had boarded. I found this to be very strange, as the train needed to always stay on schedule. Little time was available for simply stopping. There must have been something wrong with one of the employees or the conductor or possibly even the train itself. Attention passengers, we apologize for the delay. We will continue on our trip in 5 minutes. Once again, we apologize for the delay. We thank you for choosing to ride with us and enjoy your evening. The overhead speakers broke through my thoughts and pulled me back into reality. I simply looked around the car for a moment and then texted Brian to let him know of the 5-minute delay. When I looked back outside my window again was when I saw it. The tall figure was hunched over and with its back towards me. I could see the back of its white skull and its antlers broken and distorted. It was extremely frail, its limbs impossibly long and spindly. The creature was in the tree line across the town. Hardly any specific details were noticeably through the extreme snow, however I recognized right away the creature. Doubt it settled in almost as fast as the creature seemed to appear. Has it always been there? Was my mind playing tricks on me? It became more and more obvious the longer I gawked at it. How had I not noticed it until now? What the hell? I whispered under my breath. At the moment, I was so quiet that I wasn't even sure I had said it out loud. Just as soon as I questioned, the creature whirled its head at a near 180-degree angle to face me. The black pits for eyes stared deep into my soul. This creature had heard me, and now this creature had seen me. I was sure of it. Its mouth unhinged and an animal's corpse fell out, blood spilling everywhere. Whatever this creature had been consuming was too mangled to determine what it really was. The train jolted to life and crawled across the tracks, gradually gaining speed. I was startled from the sudden movement and jumped nearly out of my seat. The creature only stared as I sped off. I scrambled to get my laptop out of my bag and reconnect it to the train's Wi-Fi. I spent the last 2.5 hours of my trip researching the creature. This is where I had learned of its name, Wendigo. This creature had been a part of native folklore for many generations. I nearly couldn't hold my dinner, and when I read about the stories of cannibals becoming Wendigos hundreds of years ago, after reading other people's close encounters online, I was more and more convinced that what I saw was real. I was ready to move on and forget about my encounter with the Wendigo by the time I stepped off the train. I practically fell into Brian's arms and broke down, a mixture of fear and emotions of sadness and loneliness overtaking me all at once. I was grateful to be there with him, in his arms when I needed him most. I told him about my encounter with the cryptid on the drive back to his apartment. I believe that you definitely saw something, he began, his doubt unintentionally present in his voice. I just don't believe that a creature like that exists is all. Like, how come the only solid proof of its existence are tall tales and folklore? I don't know, Brian. I quietly looked to my feet. He reached one of his hands off the wheel and held mine firmly and reassuringly. I don't know what it is, I guess. It feels real to me. Well, that's good enough for me, he said calmly. That's enough reason for me to keep you safe. His classic cute grin formed on his face, revealing only a few of his nearly perfect white teeth. Oh, you need a reason to keep me safe, I jokingly said, as if he had said something offensive. Well, no. He stumbled over his words. Who? I made it comically clear that I was not believing him. Brian had managed to make me forget all about my terrible experience hours ago. We were laughing and joking around as he pulled into his parking space in his apartment complex. The building itself hadn't been very tall, only about 10 stories. The building itself was nearly completely surrounded by dark Canadian woods. His town wasn't very large, only about 8,000 residents. Beautiful lush evergreen forests surrounded the little city, with nearly every house having its own tree in the front lawn. Sparkling white snowflakes gently fell around me as I stepped out of Brian's car. The parking lot was lightly covered in snow before I had managed to make it to the entrance of the building. Brian, like the gentleman he is, carried my luggage from the car into the apartment. He was talking about one of the regular customers at his fast food part-time job when I cut him off. Listen, I said in a hushed whisper. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Goosebumps formed all over my body. Someone was watching us. I could feel it. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I don't hear anything, Chris. Exactly. It's so quiet. There weren't any noises around. Not a single sound. Only the eerie dead silence. Is it always this quiet? In the middle of the night? Yeah, it is. Brian wasn't making me feel any better. What's wrong, Chrissy? You still spooked? Let's just go inside. I don't like it out here. I clung onto his arm and rushed towards the front doors. Once inside and in the elevator, I told him what I read online. I explained that the absence of any natural noises or wild animals typically means there's a predator around. With his apartment complex close to some dark woods, I wasn't very calm. I also told him how I felt that we were being watched from something in the woods. Babe, your nerves are probably just shot. He held me close to him, trying to calm me down. I promise you're safe here. It's gone. I promise. He drifted off. That night I dreamed that the creature had followed us. I saw from its point of view as it followed our car towards Brian's apartment. I saw as it watched us get out from the car and head inside. And I saw as it crawled into bed behind me, holding me in place. Don't move, it hissed, its hot breath on my ear. I woke up in a cold sweat. Brian was sound asleep beside me, looking peaceful as ever. I went to the kitchen and got myself a glass of water. I put on my warm, fuzzy housecoat over top of my pajamas and stood outside on the balcony. Some fresh air would do me good, I thought to myself. It was 3:20 in the morning, and there I was on the balcony of the 7th floor, contemplating a cigarette. I wanted to quit ever since I had taken ownership of my brothers, but on that balcony I felt as though I had so desperately needed one. Feeling ashamed of myself for even considering one, I threw the only cigarette I had off the balcony. I needed to get a hold of myself before I returned home. I couldn't let Zach see me like this. Gabe would scold me if he were here, I thought. Wiping tears off my face, I looked around the tree line. I was just starting to regain my composure when I noticed something out of place. In the tree line was the deer skull. The horrid creature's body was undoubtedly attached to it. It just stared at me. I whirled around and nearly dove inside Brian's apartment. I slammed the balcony glass door shut and locked it. As I headed to make sure the front door was locked, Brian intercepted me, forcing a scream out of me. What's the matter? Christina. Brian held me by my arms. I wouldn't stop wailing. All that I could get out was, "It's following me," in between the sobs. He held me in a close hug until I was calm enough to explain my nightmare and about the creature I saw mere moments ago. Stay here, he said as he headed towards the balcony and took a look outside. I watched as he unlocked the door and stepped onto the balcony. A chill went down my spine, but not because of the wintry night air flowing into the apartment. Brian just stood there, staring at one spot. After a long pause, he slowly backed into the apartment, not taking his eyes off the creature outside. I knew he saw it. I knew he believed me. I could see it in his face. His eyes wide with fear, his mouth only slightly ajar. Without looking at me, he said, "The parking lot is in the back of the complex. Get your things. We can't stay here." Are you crazy? That thing is outside. It's following me. I nearly yelled, panic setting in. I felt as though I was going to vomit. That thing. It told me Brian was in terror. I don't know how, but it told me that it was going to come inside. I gasped, tears streaming down my face. We have to go, he urged. I grabbed his hand and he grabbed his keys and we rushed out the front door. We ran to the elevator and rapidly hit the down button. I decided that taking the stairs was faster and bolted through the door towards the stairs, Brian following right behind me. Reaching the stairwell, I looked to the bottom before descending the stairs. About halfway down the first flight, I heard heavy tapping coming from the bottom. I leaned over the banister and saw the undead deer creature making its way up the stairs. Brian nearly bumped into me as I spun around and sprinted up the stairs crying and screaming. He followed my lead without question as I headed towards the elevator, doors just beginning to open. We both cramped ourselves into the elevator and Brian rapidly pushed the ground floor button Just as the double doors slowly closed, we saw the stairwell doorway open and the animal's snout making its way towards us. We held each other, Brian verbally praying and me regretting most of my past life's choices. Ground floor and parking, the elevator dinged, cueing us to make our hasty escape. We ran like our lives depended on it, because in those long moments, they did. On our way to Brian's car, I slipped and fell into the snow. Brian, who was ahead of me, turned around and prepared to help me up. "No, go. Start the car. Go," I yelled frantically as I slowly made my way to my feet. He spun around and ran towards the car again. I took one step forward and fell to my knees, pain pulsing through my ankle. I loudly groaned in pain, clenching my teeth. I managed to get to my feet and half-limp, half-jog to the car. Just as I closed the passenger door, the front doors of the apartment complex were violently torn from their hinges. The creature held nothing back as it sprinted on all fours towards the car. "Hang on." Brian shifted the car into drive and floored it. Normally, the wintry road conditions would have evoked anxiety in me, but right now I felt as though Brian wasn't driving fast enough. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, watching the creature gallop towards us, its skinny form seemingly moving in unnatural angles with each step. "Are you all right?" Brian asked of deep concern, his eyes trained on the road ahead. "I think that I broke my ankle. I managed to get out in between breaths." He cursed under his breath. "I don't think we can get you to a hospital with that thing on our asses," Brian thought out loud. "Did you bring your phone?" I asked him. "I'm going to call the police." "Damn it. No, I left mine at the apartment," Brian said plainly. I quietly sobbed as I too had left my phone in the rush. "We are going to die tonight, aren't we?" I said out loud, not wanting an answer. "No, babe, don't say that. Things are going to be fine. We'll make it out of this." "Will we? Will we actually, Brian?" I yelled at him, tears streaming down his face too. He was terrified, just like me, and yet he was trying to protect me and keep me calm. I stumbled an apology in between sobs, but Brian cut me off. "It's gone." He slowed the car to a stop and looked all around. "Where did it go?" "It's gone." "Where did it go?" I too began to look around, unease settling in. I'm not sure what was more horrific, seeing the creature pursue us or not being able to see it but feel that it was still there. We sat there in the car for a long while, just looking around desperately. In the distance down the road, I noticed headlights. I pointed them out to Brian, and he flashed his high beams off and on. The car pulled over to the side of the road, and Brian got out to talk to the driver. I bit my lip, not enjoying the idea of Brian getting out of the car. "Please, call the police. We need an ambulance too," I heard Brian talk to the driver. Just as Brian made his way back to the car, the creature came out of the darkness and took him in its grasp. It happened so quickly. He was just gone, only a few drops of blood on the ground to prove that he was even there. The man in his car across the road screamed and sped off. I sat there, stunned and no doubt in shock. The monster rammed into my passenger side door head first, breaking me from my trance. It broke through the window and shoved its face towards me. I struggled against my seatbelt and repeatedly kicked it in its hollow skull. It caught my leg in its mouth and clamped its jaws down hard. I screamed from the pain, blood pooling around my wounds. I heard the horrific sound of my leg being bitten through as the beast crunched through bone. All I could do was scream. Biting down on my other leg, it pulled me through the window. I screamed for my life, but it was no use. With ease, it had flung me face first into a nearby tree, and everything went black instantly. My entire body seared with pain as blurry images of men and women in police uniforms and rescue uniforms loaded me onto a bed and into an ambulance. I was drifting in and out of consciousness. When I had finally come to full consciousness, I was in a hospital bed and hooked up to countless pieces of machinery. I had a feeding tube and an oxygen tube in me. My arm had an 4 in it, heartbeat monitors attached to my chest. The nurse reading my file gasped when she saw me awake and rushed out of the room. The PA system announced several doctors to where I assumed I was located. Within minutes, the doctors were unhooking the feeding tube and oxygen tube, as I had no longer needed them. We expected you to be in a coma for at least another month. One of the doctors explained to me after the tubes were removed. Another month? I asked before clearing my throat. It still felt as though I had those plastic tubes shoved down my throat. You were out for 6 weeks. You were in a very brutal car accident. While waiting for the emergency vehicles to arrive, you were attacked by an animal. It was a very horrible scene. I blankly stared at him. Don't you remember, Christine? He cocked his head to the side and gave me a quizzical look. It's Christina, I corrected him. And no, I don't. I lied. I laid there for hours remembering the horrible nightmare that happened to me nearly 2 months ago. My whole body ached and pulsed with pain. I could hardly move. I thought about Brian for the longest time. I assumed he had to be dead, but he had shown up later that night. I came as soon as I heard that you were awake, he told me as he leaned over and kissed my forehead. After the creature had attacked me, it went for you. I watched as it threw you against the tree. I tried to pull it off you, but it threw me away. It told me that it wanted you. It told me that you saw something that you weren't supposed to see. Brian explained. By the time the police and ambulances showed up, the creature had already left. I never saw it leave. It was just somehow gone. I rode with you in the back. The officers recorded it as a bear attack. They didn't believe my story. Brian went on to say that he was administered into the hospital for a day with only flesh wounds and stitches. He said that he and my brothers and parents visited me nearly every day or so. My parents came? I asked, stunned. He nodded, giving me a half smile. In fact, they gave me a call on my way here. They're headed up with your brothers. They said that they'll try to get here before breakfast. When they got the call that you were awake, they pretty much dropped what they were doing and hopped in the car. I teared up and smiled. What did you tell them about what happened? The police told them what they thought happened. I went with it because I want them to like me. I giggled. Then I struggled to sit up. Brian rushed over to give help and sit me up. I reached down to scratch my leg, but I couldn't quite find the spot. Hey, hon, can you help me? I've got an itch and I can't reach it. I'm too sore to be reaching down. I looked at Brian and he smiled back at me. Sure, babe. Whereabouts? My left leg, just below the kneecap. Brian went pale suddenly. What's wrong? I removed the blankets as a wave of adrenaline washed over me. Both of my legs were gone from just above the knees. I was still coping with my new handicap when my younger brothers, accompanied by my parents, rushed into the room and nearly knocked the wind out of me in a big hug each. Guys, I'm okay. I'm all right. I laughed a little out loud from pure happiness. They said you might not wake up. Zach sobbed as he held me close. They were talking to Mom and Dad about having to pull the plug on you. Gabe said grimly. Oh, guys. Doctors aren't always right. Look, I'm fine. Then I looked to my parents, both of them clearly holding back tears. We love you so much, Christina. Don't you ever go thinking otherwise. My mom's voice on the verge of breaking. Come back and live with us, okay? You'll be needing someone to look after you. My father chimed in. I'll have Gabe dash. I started. We've moved back in with Mom and Dad, Gabe said, giving me a warm smile. I looked over to Brian, who gave me a you should listen to them. Look with a smile to top it off. I'll come back home. When they let me out of here, I couldn't finish. I cried of happiness. My parents loved me after all. My parents embraced me in a hug each, and my dad stepped out of the room to talk to one of the nurses. How was the drive up? I asked my mom, wiping a tear from my face. Oh, not too bad. The first few hours there was a little snow, but once we passed through Oshawa, Toronto area, it wasn't too bad. Oh, nice. I trailed off. Oh, Chrissy. Zach grew excited. I saw something really cool on the drive up. Oh, that's right. Go on, tell your sister, my mom encouraged. It was a bear-looking creature, but it was wearing this animal skull. I think it was a deer's skull, and the bear looked real skinny and tall. Isn't that something? My mom looked at me. I just looked to Brian. I knew I was probably as pale as he was in that moment. I didn't see anything, Gabe stated matter-of-factly. I ignored him. Yeah, it was freaky, Gabe missed it. I saw it too. I don't think your father saw it. My mother's voice grew distant as I stared at Brian. Are you okay? You don't look so good. Someone asked me, but I wasn't sure who. Maybe you all should go home early. I'll bring Chrissy back down when she's out of the hospital. Brian said. You all have lives to get back to. Oh, Brian, that's so sweet of you, but we'll pass. We've got a hotel room nearby, and we took the boys off school, my mom said in her fake cheery voice. Mom, I stated in the most serious tone I could muster up. Listen to me very carefully. You have seen something that you weren't meant to see. That thing. It's on its way right now. I teared up. It's coming to find you. And little Zachy. Second story. My Deep Woods experience. All you need to know before I begin this story is, I am a fervent camper. I often take prolonged camping trips alone, and I am very apt at outdoor crafts and am no stranger to being outside in the wilderness, often alone. I still camp to this day, although this experience was the direct cause of a nearly 3-year break in these solo expeditions. I am not willing to divulge any information about myself, my country of origin, or the location of said experience. I will start from the point at which I arrived at a national park that will remain unnamed. I pulled my 2007 Skoda Octavia into a gravel car park and allowed my eyes to wander across the towering fir trees, tightly packed together, shielding the woodland beyond from any of the ever-ebbing sunlight. I'd arrived at the park at 5 p.m., and it was late autumn, so the sun was lowering in the sky beyond the mountains that encapsulated the valley I was in. There were a few other cars sitting in the open space. Some of them were empty, seemingly left by other campers, where 2 had small groups gathered, unslinging packs and stowing camping gear in the rear of the vehicles. I took a deep breath and opened my car door. I walked around to the back of my car and unlocked it. I removed my backpack from the car and slung it over my shoulders. I took my bedroll and tucked it under my arm before locking up my car. I wheeled on my feet, ready to lose myself in nature for a glorious weekend of solitude. I nodded happily to other hikers on my way to the beginning of the trail and set off into the park. I was fairly experienced when this happened, having been a hiker and camper for 13 years already, and a mountain rescue worker for 9 of those. As such, I tended to get off of the trails whenever I could and find secluded, isolated spots in the woods. I also packed emergency gear, including a flare gun and blank-firing pistol for signaling to others I was in danger. Where I come from, hunting is somewhat restricted, however much of the rules to hunting still applied, one of which was 3 rapid shots usually meant someone is in trouble and can be used as a way to signal others that you might be lost or hurt. I got off of the trail after around 30 minutes of brisk hiking, and as the daylight wavered ever lower in the sky, I cut myself a path through the thick foliage. The sun had set after about another hour and a half of trekking, and I began using my headlamp. It wasn't much longer before I heard what I had been looking for. When researching the park a week before, I had found a forest survey map, which detailed a mountain stream that fed out of the mountains down into the woods below for around 12 miles, which was situated about 4.5 miles from the trail I had entered on. The sound of babbling water lured me to the edge of the stream, where I cleared a small area for my camp. I erected my tent and gathered some rocks from the brook, which I used to create a small fire at. I checked my watch, which read 7:50 p.m. I decided it was as good a time as any to eat something, so I got out some beef from my cooler compartment in my backpack and took out one of my steel skewering rods from my kit. After I cooked the meat and drank some water, I decided I wanted to sit in the woods for a bit, taking in the darkness and the sounds. I killed the fire, keeping my fire-starting kit just inside the tent flap, and hung an electronic lantern in my tent, remembering to remove the rain/smoke cap so that the light would be visible through the mosquito netting on the top. I picked my way towards the brook, which I was probably around 5 meters or so away from, and sat on the edge listening to the water trickling. It was deathly silent apart from the brook and the gentle rustling of trees. I could hear the occasional fox whoop and leaves brushing and twigs cracking in the distance. I sat like that for maybe an hour or so before deciding that I wanted to get some sleep, as I had planned a hearty trek up into the mountains the next day. And I would have to start early if I wanted to have a chance of reaching the upper plateau where I could repitch my tent. Plus, I'd have to leave myself some extra time to fit the storm straps to it, as the winds tended to gust at around 40 miles per hour on in the mountains. I moved back to my tent, following the lamplight until I reached the zippers. I opened it up and sealed myself inside, laying back on my sleeping bag. I stared up at the lantern, before then reaching up and turning the knob on the side until it dimmed to darkness, and then finally off. I sighed heavily. I specifically remember the smell of the woods in the air and how quiet it was. No road noise carried this far out into the trees. It was magical. I loved every moment of it. It wasn't long, though, before I heard something abruptly interrupting my peaceful night in the wilderness. I stirred and raised my head, squeezing my watch to illuminate the digital screen. 1:34 a.m. bleared into my eyes. I listened intently, turning my right ear towards where I thought the sound was coming from. I squeezed my eyes tightly shut to focus my senses. It sounded like movement, as if something was walking through the woods. The harder I listened, the more I started to realize it sounded bipedal, like a person walking through the woods, dragging their feet through the fallen leaves. Who the fuck would be out here at 1:30 in the morning in the pitch black? I thought to myself. I wondered if someone was perhaps lost. It didn't make sense for a hiker to be out here in the dark wandering around. That's just a really good way of getting yourself lost. And even search and rescue don't search in the darkness unless absolutely necessary. And when we do, we use extremely powerful lights, and 90% of the time a supporting helicopter will provide FLIR to aid a search. I sat up in my sleeping bag, and it fell away from my shoulders. I felt the penetrating cold suck the heat away from my body as I went rigid, concentrating in the darkness, trying to get my eyes to adjust to it and my ears to focus. The sound of the walking seemed to come closer, and I felt my heart pick up a little. I decided that if they came too close, I'd call out. I wanted whatever it was to know I was listening. If it was an animal, it would surely run away. If it was a human, they might need help. And if not, they may think twice about coming any closer. The steps came closer still, so I called out, "Who's there? Do you need help?" In the moments that passed, I could hear my heart thundering in my ears. The footfalls had abruptly stopped, as if whatever or whoever it was had frozen in place. I wasn't too worried about animals where I was. The fauna was not considerably dangerous. Wild hogs were the most dangerous creatures out there. Although I admit when they're pissed off enough, they can be more than a match for people. Hogs are nocturnal, however, but the footfalls sounded too heavy and careless for a wild pig. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing came back. All of a sudden, I heard a loud crack right next to my left side, as if someone had slapped a stick into a tree trunk and broken it in half, like I would as a kid. I fumbled for my flashlight and illuminated the end of the tent. It was only then I saw a crumpled piece of material laying at the foot of my sleeping bag. The tent cap. I hadn't put it back on. It was then that I became all too aware that there was a rather large window in the roof of my tent for any would-be stalker. Slowly, I raised my eyes to it. I had spent nearly a decade of my life working out in the wild. I wasn't easily scared. But what I saw above my head in the torchlight terrified me. There above my face were a set of wide, crazed eyes staring back at me from the void. I screamed aloud and dropped the light, fumbling madly to peel my sleeping bag off of me and scooped it back up. My fight or flight had kicked in, and I wasn't going anywhere. I tore out of the tent and spun around to face it, yelling angrily, "What the fuck are you doing?" I was met with endless black. Nothing was there. My tent flapped lazily in the gentle breeze. No one was around. I circled the tent a few times, after retrieving my high-powered headlamp, scanning the trees around me. Nothing. I finally crawled back into the tent, noting that it was now nearly 3 a.m. I didn't sleep that night. I just waited eagerly for the first sign of daylight, and in the chilly morning air, I decided I would just get out of the woods and head up to my mountain camp. The camping areas on the plateau were popular, and usually tents would pitch all along there during the spring to autumn months, so I knew I'd likely be within a few hundred meters of plenty of other hikers or campers 24/7. In the dim dawn, I feverishly packed away my tent and hoisted my gear onto my back, before heading towards the ever-increasing gradients of the foothills of the mountains at the edge of the valley. The whole while trying to banish the thoughts of the previous night from my mind. As I walked through the undergrowth towards the mountains, I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder. The events of the previous night played on my mind over and over, like a broken record on a loop. The footsteps, the snap, the eyes. It was horrifying. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that it had happened in the early hours of the morning. No one in their right mind would be out in the woods at that hour. It seemed so inexplicable. The going wasn't too tough. The gradient slowly increased, and the air began to thin out a little as I gained altitude. Eventually, I found myself transitioning from grass and foliage underfoot to gravel and rock, on narrow paths leading up the sides of the mountains. As I began to climb higher, the wind picked up, and a thick, heavy fog set in, like a dirty white blanket, wisping and snaking around myself in the rocky terrain. Tufts and patches of mountain grass jutted out every few feet, and shocks of small mountain conifers stood in small groups here and there. I suddenly realized that I was getting quite cold, so I pulled my windbreaker out of my backpack and pulled it on. As I turned back to zip my bag up, something gave me pause. Just about over the top of the sound of the wind lashing against the rocks and whipping through the conifers, I could hear what sounded like singing. I listened intently, hunched over my backpack. Yes, it was singing. I couldn't quite make out the words, but I recognized the tune and timbre of it. I decided to wait to see if I could spot the other hiker. I'm usually a solitary person, but it would have been nice to see another friendly face after the night before. I stood up, slowly pulling the bag onto my back and crossing my arms against the wind. I peered into the thick fog in the direction of the singing. I began to realize I could make out the words now. It was getting closer. It was a song from the 30s by Fats Waller. Eerily, on the breeze, in a low, slightly discordant tone, I could hear the words, "Be sure it's true when you say, I love you, because it's a sin to tell a lie." My grandmother would always sing that song, so I knew it well. It was an odd juxtaposition. On the one hand, it brought back warm memories of times gone by in my grandmother's kitchen in the 80s, watching her cooking, mixed with the slightly unnerving trepidation of finding out who was up on this trail with me in the fog. As these thoughts swirled around my head, I became aware that the singing had now stopped, and that I could see the outline of a person walking slowly towards me. Whoever it was quite thin and didn't seem to be wearing a whole lot. It looked like they were wearing a poncho or tunic or something. Then, the figure came out from the fog, and around 3 feet away from me stood a man. He was thin, but sinewy and looked well-weathered and strong. He had a long, stained beard, which was salt and pepper-colored. His hair, too, was long and thinning. He had an oddly calming stare, but his whole presence seemed to be one of ownership, as if I was in his home, and he was trying to figure out how I'd got in, which was insane, as we were in the middle of nowhere. He was indeed wearing a long tunic, which seemed to be made from the hide of different animals sewn together with twine: deer, boar, rabbit, and fox. He stood for a few moments regarding me, and it wasn't until I noticed what he was holding in his hand that I became scared. In his left hand, he held what looked to be a handmade knife, made with bone and twine for a grip. He glanced down at the blade as he noticed I was staring at it. He made a flicking motion with it, before letting out a childish chuckle, lowering his head and bringing his shoulders up like a little boy caught with something he knew he shouldn't have. His smile was blood-curdling. It consisted of jagged, broken, yellowy rotting teeth, with what looked like flesh and stringy roots stuck in between the bombed-out city-esque disaster zone which was his mouth. As I began to take a step back, he playfully stepped forward to match me, in an over-exaggerated, almost childlike manner. I felt like I was trapped in a Mexican standoff, and my heart was punching the inside of my chest. I wanted out, and I wanted out right then and there. I held up my hands, and he giggled maniacally. The guy was clearly disturbed. It was only then that I began to realize this was probably who had been peering through my tent the night before. What happened next was completely involuntary, and looking back on it now as a veteran SAR officer and outdoorsman, I feel ashamed to admit, but tears welled up in my eyes and rolled down my cheeks, and I choked out an, "I'm sorry," as to apologize for whatever it was I had done to offend this man so much as to feel the need to stalk me. My mind was racing at 1,000,000 thoughts per second, and suddenly I had a flash of inspiration, which I sorely wish I hadn't had. If it was the same guy, he'd ran off the night before when I came out to challenge him. So with a sudden burst of energy, I lurched forward and took 5 great steps towards him. He didn't move an inch. Apart from the half-step forward he took to slip that blade into my stomach. I didn't even feel it at first. I looked down at the warm patch accumulating on my lower tummy and saw blood seeping over the knife and onto his hand. He pulled it out slowly and raised the knife to his mouth. He put the blade inside and again in a childish manner, sucked on it as if it were a lollipop, and made another childlike mm sound, his eyes glistening happily. I felt my knees buckle below me, and I fell sideways. And then I was falling, spinning, rolling, faster and faster. I had fallen over the side of the trail. I don't remember the entire journey down, but I certainly remember the abject searing pain in my stomach and lower limbs that greeted me when I came around. I groaned in agony, which turned into a scream. The pain in my lower body was horrendous. I looked at my legs, and saw that whilst they didn't appear broken, there was a large spindly branch sticking out from my lower left calf muscle. Blood had also pooled underneath my belly, where a deep penetrating wound was still oozing the scarlet liquid. My survival mode kicked in. I sat up, forcing myself to consciousness. I needed a salve or a binding. I pulled myself off the floor, which was possibly one of the hardest affairs of my life. My wounds made it feel as though I had been struck down with the flu. My strength sapped. I limped towards a birch tree and breathed a sigh of relief when I saw it was next to a mountain stream. Sadly, it was not the one from earlier in my hike, as I would come to find out. I pulled some leaves from the tree and noted as my despair sank ever higher, my backpack was missing, likely on my long fall from the mountains above. I stumbled to the stream and began splashing my stomach with the fresh, cool water, before holding the leaves loosely in my hands to clean them to the best of my ability. I then removed my windbreaker carefully and sat on the bank. I removed my jumper and then my thermal t-shirt until I was shirtless. This was going to hurt. I mushed the leaves together and tore a sleeve from my thermal t-shirt and wrapped them up inside of it. Then with a deep breath, I pushed it into my wound, as a form of rudimentary gauze. I knew that sometimes when patients underwent multiple stage surgeries, doctors and surgeons would leave gauze packed inside of the body temporarily, so I hoped this might do a similar trick. The pain was tremendous. Imagine the kind of cramps you get when you're violently ill, then multiply by 10 and add a hot white searing pain. I then tore the shirt in half and wrapped it tightly around my stomach. Blood was seeping through still, and I knew unless I got to help soon, or at least found a way to close the wound properly, I wouldn't last long. I pulled my other layers back on, before turning my attention to the stick in my leg. I could see it was in the muscle, which wouldn't be too bad, so long as I could keep it clean. I sat for 5 minutes, to give myself time to recuperate from my previous do-it-yourself medical procedure, and then took another deep breath. Gripping the stick tightly, I pulled. I thought the knife wound hurt, but oddly, this was possibly the worst pain I'd ever felt in my life, likely because the stick was jagged and had knots and lumps all over it. As I pulled, my vision flickered and failed, and my strength left me. I maybe got it an inch or so out before I had to stop. I couldn't let myself pass out. It could be a death sentence. I took a few sharp breaths, and then with all my remaining might, I ripped the stick clean out of my calf and screamed in agony. Bright white lights danced in my eyes as I fell back into the leaves and passed out. I came to, and I had no idea how long it had been, but it hadn't seemed long. The sun was still high in the autumn sky. That was the one thing I was glad for throughout this ordeal. Apart from up in the mountains, the sky was always clear and blue. In the daytime, that is. I sat up, noticing the dried blood on my jean leg. I pulled myself up and limped to the stream, where I rolled up the leg of my jeans to wash the wound. I then used the remaining material from my t-shirt I had torn up and soaked it in the water. I then wrung out the sodden cloth as best I could before wrapping it around my punctured muscle. Breathing a sigh of accomplishment, I decided to rest on a rock, but for no longer than a few moments. I knew the key to my survival would be to keep active, keep moving, and a whole lot of luck that I didn't run into that man again. After a short rest, I excitedly began to follow the stream. Luckily, there was no sight of the man who'd attacked me on the trail in the mountains. I was hoping against all hope that this stream might be the same as the one from my earlier camp, or maybe connected to it. As stated before, I would not be so lucky. I followed the stream for most of the day until the sun began to once again dip in the sky. I knew that without shelter in the autumn air, a windbreaker would likely not keep me alive. It is at this point that I must stress that I truly believe only my survival training helped me through this. I would honestly recommend that anyone with outdoors interests or who lives near a heavily wooded area take a course on survival. I decided that I needed to make some kind of shelter whilst I still had sunlight. I knew that so long as I had the stream to drink from, as it was clear flowing water coming down from the mountain, I could survive for longer than without, and food was less important. I used my remaining energy to dig a small, grave for want of a better word, and then I found some fir trees and snapped some lower branches from them. I knew that if I lay in my little grave and covered myself with the fir tree limbs, I could at least keep myself somewhat warm. I had only a survival knife in my windbreaker, which I was lucky didn't break my ribs as I fell from the mountain trail, and my mobile phone, blank firing gun, flare gun, tent, survival kit, and pretty much anything else I would have desperately needed were in the backpack, which was now either strewn across a mountain slope or in the hands of that maniac. In a sudden fit of spite, I remember hoping he'd lost the backpack and that he had to continue living in the squalid way he had been for as long as possible, although he seemed a little too far gone to probably care about his conditions for life anymore. However, whoever he was clearly adept at survival. As the sun lowered in the sky further, and the night began to fall, I slumped down into the earthy cot I had constructed and pulled some branches piled next to me on top of me. I doubted I would get much sleep, but I was proven wrong, as within the first 5 minutes of laying in that ditch, exhaustion took over me. I woke with a start at what I imagined to be sometime in the early hours of the morning. I forgot to mention until now, but my watch had been smashed during my fall, and now no longer worked, so I had no means of telling what time it was. I was racked with pain, aching all over, from both my wounds and my awkward sleeping arrangements. At least I hoped that's what it was, and not the start of an infection. I lay in the still and dark of the cold night for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the woods. It was only then that the realization of my predicament hit me fully. The smell of pine needles, tree sap, and earth in my nostrils, and the biting cold stinging my feet and hands and face, brought it all crashing down on me. I felt a pit form in my stomach as I came to terms with the fact that I may very well die out here. I contemplated that realistically, I had no way of knowing where I was. I hadn't checked my map on the trail because I hadn't reached any of the points I had planned to stop at after a certain distance, so I didn't know if I'd curved around the mountain towards the north, if I had fell on a bend to the west, or if I'd still been on the south part of the trail when I fell. If I had fallen much past the western bend, I was fucked. Beyond the woodland that skirts the southern mountain trails, there's not a lot else other than hundreds of miles of dense forest, ravines, mountains, and plateaus. Just as these thoughts peppered my brain like buckshot after buckshot, I heard a distant sound that made my blood chill to ice. Somewhere, way off in the distance, I could hear a low sound. Millions of hearts have been broken just because these words were spoken. I love you. Yes, I do. I love you. If you break my heart, I'll die. I could hear my own breath become rapid and shallow, my heart pulsing in my ears. The cold fled from my body as adrenaline began to rush through me, and pain melted away. I sat stock still in the blackness, focusing on the familiar sound. I squeezed my eyes shut. I clearly remember thinking to myself, it's just a nightmare, a hallucination. There's no way he's found you in this wilderness. And just like that, the next thing I remember is being woken by sunlight, shining through the trees. I panicked for a moment, flying out of my ditch, my brain hard booting itself into fight or flight mode. I must have passed out from shock or something. My eyes darted around, scanning every single tree in my periphery. I couldn't see anything. I felt completely exhausted as my adrenaline began to crash. I was convincing myself it had been a hallucination brought on by extreme cold and hunger. It wasn't until I had been down to the stream to clean my wounds, take a drink, and refresh myself by pushing cold water over my head that I noticed something. Nearby to where I had dug my little earth coffin, on the trunk of one of trees I had gathered some of the pine limbs from, was a deer skull. It wasn't there before. I know that for a fact. My poor heart must have been drained from all the arrhythmia in its cadence, constantly going from resting to racing to slowing in the cold, as once again, my heart rose to a sickening crescendo as I slowly approached the skull. In the center of its head, in between where the antler stumps were, was a small carving of a love heart. Stumbling over my own feet, I turned and started marching back along the stream, as I had the day before. I just wanted to get out of there. As I traipsed through the forest, I tried to gauge my direction by using the mountain positions. The only problem was that I was in a valley, surrounded by mountains. If I was going in the wrong direction, I wouldn't know until it was far too late to hope to just turn around and go the other way. I don't know how long I had been walking for, but I imagined I'd been walking the stream until about midday, as the sun was almost dead center in the sky above. I remember allowing myself a few moments to stare up at the sky, wishing I was a bird so I could fly away from this nightmare. I scolded myself, sternly reasserting that dreaming was giving up, and that I needed to keep moving, keep busy. I once again marched on through the woods, praying that I was going in the right direction. I tried to keep my thoughts from the skull and the singing, and as the day wore on, I found this easier to do, because I began to understand my worst fears coupled with a knife wound to the gut had come to fruition. I was almost certain I had now gained an infection through my wound. Which one wasn't clear to me, if not both, and I panicked myself with the thought of dying out in the wilderness from illness. I tried to focus and bolster myself against the target of reaching a road or a structure. In the horror films, there's always a shack in the woods or an old house. But this was real life. There was nothing. Absolutely nothing for miles, just wilderness. I contemplated a few times maybe just heading back towards the mountains, as I knew that there would be trails in them and other campers, but I wasn't sure I'd survive a climb in my present condition, and without a definite trail to start from. I couldn't afford to waste my valuable energy on dead ends or climbing, and with how low my strength was getting, I doubted I could climb anyway. It was around that time that the hunger started to really play havoc with me. I felt tight cramping knots deep inside my stomach. They were severe and agonizing. I doubled over a few times, and this made me realize that it was likely the beginning of me starving coupled with having a knife wound in my gut. I hadn't expected it to kick in quite so fast. It had been about 2 days since I had eaten at this point, and I honestly thought I'd hold out a little longer. As I pushed myself on through the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It felt as though someone was with me, but every time I checked, I found nothing. As once again the sun began to drop behind the trees, the cold started to eat away at me. I decided to once again dig a trench to sleep in. As I plunged my hands into the dirt, I noticed blood leaking from my stomach. My temporary bandage job had begun to fall apart, and the wound was no better than before and looked infected. I clutched my stomach in pain and shock. I removed my boots and socks before replacing them and washed the socks in the stream as best I could. I tied them both together and wrapped them around my waist, trying to force the makeshift wound coverings tighter against my skin. I went back to digging my ditch, but noticed the blood kept coming. At this point, I decided I was just going to walk. I needed to get help, and sleeping here might mean I never woke up again. I pulled myself together and began stumbling on alongside the stream. As I walked in the darkness, fumbling my way through the woodland hellscape, I started to hallucinate. I kept imagining headlights in the distance, and whenever I ran to them, they would stay the same distance away. During one of these hallucinations, I tripped and fell hard onto my face. I lay in the dirt, breathing in soil and razor-sharp cold air through my nose. I squeezed my eyes shut and steeled myself, not wanting to give in to the urge to cry. And then, what couldn't have been more than 50 yards away from me? Be sure it's true when you say I love you, because it's a sin to tell a lie. I couldn't believe that this guy had found me again. I spun around and, in the darkness, I could just about make out his slender frame. He seemed to be walking briskly towards me, singing in that low, raspy voice, like sandpaper and chalk. I sprinted for it, running as hard as my legs would allow. A limp in my every other step seemed to make each footfall 1,000 years longer than the last. I could no longer hear him singing. Instead, he was giggling and cackling, like a child chasing a butterfly. I could hear his pounding steps behind me. The freezing night air burned my lungs like petrol, and I wheezed and coughed as my stomach pulsated pain throughout my abdomen. My leg, while seemingly mostly healed by now, seared as I forced my fatigued and damaged muscles to carry me further than they were willing to. The stranger was ever present behind me, though, and showed no signs of slowing. In the distance, I could just make out in the pale moonlight what looked to be a rocky outcrop at the beginning of some foothills to the mountains. I pushed as hard as I could to reach them. My lungs blazed and my chest heaved as I ran, smashing through the pain as hard as I possibly could, my every motion sending vibrations of pain through my body. As I reached the outcrop, I dived into a narrow alleyway between two low rocky walls and scrambled on all fours to the end of it. I darted left amongst some more rocks and noticed an overhang, with no more than maybe 12 to 14 inches of space between it and the ground. I wedged through myself forcefully into the gap and sidled underneath. I prayed he wasn't still behind me. As my heartbeat stabilized and I fought to control my breath, trying to tune my ears to the ambience around me, I could hear his feet slapping on the rocks and grass. I held my breath and listened for him. He rounded the corner of a set of rocks, and I watched him scanning for me. I swear he looked right at me and somehow didn't see me. He walked over to where I was and paced, before circling around and around the rocks. I could hear him grunting and chuckling under his breath. Every now and again he seemed to pause and catch his breath before continuing to look around for me. I could see the homemade bone knife gripped in his hand. My stomach seemed to lurch in recognition of the tool that had inflicted its current state upon it. I tried to control my breathing as best I could, which was extremely hard, as the pain in my legs, stomach, and chest was beginning to bleed through the adrenaline rush, and I desperately wanted to hyperventilate in a mixture of panic and pain. I fixed my stare on the man, willing him to just leave. Then I noticed my blood on the rocky floor beside me. My eyes widened as I realized my blood was pooling beneath me. I must have pulled the wound as I slid under the rocks. I prayed to a God I didn't believe in, that the man wouldn't step in it, as he was barefoot and would surely feel the sticky wet below his toes. I glared at his feet, leathery and black soles, with yellow and jagged overgrown thick toenails. Suddenly, he shrieked and cackled and skipped merrily into the woods and away from the rock face I was stuffed inside of. I let out a low, long and deep breath through pursed lips. I closed my eyes and let my head drop onto the hard, cold rock. I'm almost certain I started to cry in that moment, and I don't remember anything else, apart from that the next morning I awoke underneath that little outcrop, my body shaking in pain from laying in such an awkward solid place. I gingerly pulled myself from under the rock, and for some reason of all the things to come to me in that moment was the saying, "Where have you been living?" Under a rock. I chuckled at myself. Was I going mad? I leaned against the rock face and breathed deeply. I looked down at my stomach, relieved to see the bleeding had stopped again, miraculously. The gravity of my ordeal was beginning to weigh down on me. I came to terms with the fact that whoever this man was obviously lived out here. He clearly knew the area well, and obviously he could track. Either that or he was always watching me and just waiting to play with me. I began to understand then that my only real option was to keep moving and eventually I might find something. Or hopefully, I'd die in my sleep. I didn't want to die at the hands of that man. He'd already proven once that if he got his way, it wouldn't be a quick death. I staggered away from the rocks and back into the woods. My feet had erupted in blisters and sores from my lack of socks due to my using them to bind my wounds. Every step was torturous and slow. That day passed as the ones before. I started to make peace with the fact that either I was going the wrong way or I had fallen in a very unlucky place, because 3 days of solid walking had not turned up anything remotely close to civilization. I began holding out hope that once the weekend passed and my absence was noticed, my friends and family might not just write it off because of my experience. I had always told them if I was late to report it, especially if it was a day or so. If I was thinking straight, it would now be Monday, and so surely someone would realize I was gone. In the twilight hours, as crepuscular animals began to forage for food, I found myself slipping to the base of a tree and shivering in the cold. I pulled my survival knife out of my jeans and looked at the serrated blade. I contemplated waiting for the man, but surely in my current state he would overpower me far too easily. I could have easily sat at the base of that tree for a good few hours staring at that blade, before I hauled myself to my feet and continued my long trek towards what I hoped would be salvation. I don't remember that night. It was almost like a fever dream, stumbling through the forest. But I do remember that just before sunrise, I heard someone following me. Their heavy footfalls were shadowing my own. Immediately, I knew it was him. I decided that what would happen would happen. I was beyond caring. I gripped the survival knife in my frail hand and walked on. I finally came to a large open rock field and realized I hadn't fallen into the valley properly, but onto a large plateau around halfway down the mountainside, which probably saved my life. At the edge of the plateau was a set of high rock faces on both sides, and then a sheer drop directly ahead of me. I fell to my knees as I now knew I had been going the wrong way. Below the sheer drop was what looked like endless miles of trees. I began to cry, and then I heard him, giggling and shrieking like a child behind me. I heard him start to walk, then jog, then sprint at me. This was it. Me or him, I thought. I whirled around low and slashed wildly out, catching his thigh with my knife. He let out an, "Oh," as if to say, "I didn't know you were fun," and darted back, hopping and jumping like Spring-Heeled Jack in an old story. He lunged and slashed at me. I moved to avoid his knife, and he crashed into me, biting into my shoulder hard. I cried out in agony as his hideous jagged teeth tore into my muscle. I brought the knife into his ribs and stabbed 3 times before he brought his knife to my own ribs. We viciously stabbed at each other until one of us, I'm not certain who, fell away first, shortly followed by the other. My vision was pulsing slowly as blood rushed from my body. I clambered to grab my knife back up, just as he crawled onto me. He slashed down at my face, and I held up my hand to stop him. He sliced the palm of my hand open and giggled loudly. In a sudden fit of rage, I rolled over on top of him and brought my knife into his arm twice before he returned 2 more stabs at me, one of which pierced my lung. I panicked and sucked in a horrible, hissing sharp breath, which caused unbelievable pain in my chest. In a sheer panic, I slammed my knife into the side of his neck as he lay below me, and I fell to the side. I don't remember anything more than us lying side by side, gargling, gasping, and hissing in a sickening cacophony of the sounds of death. My next memory is of being woken up in a hospital. I was told that I had been found likely a few hours after the fight. The man, too, had been rescued by the same helicopter crew that rescued me. I was told he had survived, although we had both been in critical condition when we arrived at a mountain trauma center, before then being sent on to a hospital. Police had kept both of us under guard, due to the wounds and knives found with us. After I had given a statement, and the police had concluded that the man was insane, the full story began to unfold. I later learned he was a war veteran. He had gone missing shortly after being medically discharged from the military and had vanished into a nature reserve nearly 12 years ago. After I learned of his past and spoke to his family members, I decided not to seek charges. I was just glad to be alive. My family and friends begged me never to go out again, but of course after 3 years, I did, and ever since I have never been in a situation like that one. At the end of my ordeal, I was told I had survived against insane odds. My doctors told me I had a bad stab wound to my stomach, which was indeed infected. My leg had healed on its own, but some muscular damage had remained. I also sustained 6 piercing stab wounds to my upper ribs under my left arm, a slashing wound to my palm, as well as a deep penetrating stab wound to my lower left lung. I had also contracted a very serious infection through my earlier wounds, and completely unbeknownst to myself, I had fractured 5 ribs, broken 1, and cracked my femur. It took me nearly 5 months of recovery to be at the level of health I was before the ordeal. I have no hidden message to impart. This story is so unbelievable, and it just seems like something that really doesn't happen apart from in movies. I have no advice because I refuse to believe this shit could ever be common. All I can say is as I did before. If you live in a wooded area or like to hike or camp, learn survival basics from a local SAR course or even scouts. And for those of you wondering how they found me, my family had indeed reported me as missing. Luckily, I had given them all the needed information, and a hiker had actually found my backpack sitting in the middle of a lower trail, below the one I had fallen from, and so the SAR team had 3 good points of reference to start from: my car, my first camp, and then where the bag was found. They also found my blood using dogs on the trails, and eventually a team had apparently been sent in to look for me below the mountain. I never knew that they were likely only ever a day behind after my first night after the fall from the mountain, and I still don't understand how I never once heard the helicopter that was assisting them or anyone else shouting for that matter. All I know now is that what happened to me motivates me to search even harder on operations. Knowing how grateful I was that someone was looking for me and found me pushes me to bring the same sense of joy to another. Keep safe out there, folks. Third story. How to kill a Wendigo. My twin sister Jenny was murdered at age 16. I witnessed it like a coward from atop a tree in the forest where it happened. I'd actually blacked out the memory for a while. I knew she was dead, but I couldn't remember how it happened. It wasn't until I tried therapy that it slowly came back to me. I was also reminded of how much my parents used to fight. Our family was planning on a camping trip the day before my sister's death. Before leaving, my parents erupted into another massive fight. Jenny and I had been looking forward to the trip, and once again our parents' awful communication skills was ruining it before it even began. We snuck out of the house and took a lift to the forest. We left our phones at home, not caring whether our parents would be worried sick. We enjoyed ourselves the first day. I set up our tent, made a fire, had s'mores, and did all that stuff one typically associated with camping. The next morning, everything changed. I woke up alone in our tent. Outside, I hear my sister talking to someone. Inquisitive, I opened the tent and saw someone sitting at our now-out campfire who looked just like me. The figure transformed as soon as Jenny realized it wasn't me. Together we ran off, that thing rushing after us with heavy steps. I was faster than my sister and a bit more athletic. I grabbed onto a tree branch and climbed up a tree. Jenny was not so lucky. I watched it happen. I watched that thing tear my sister to pieces. I'm still haunted by her screams. I also understand now why she always appears badly mutilated in my nightmares. I stayed up in that tree overnight, my sister's corpse lying in the leaves. Her remaining eye always staring up at me. While in therapy, there was a moment when I suddenly recalled the hallucination I had the morning after my sister's death. I thought I saw her corpse clawing at the tree where I hid. She wanted me to come down and join her. It caused me to panic and cry out. A couple of men who had been camping in the area heard my screams, and at last I was rescued. My parents don't argue anymore. I hardly see them at all anymore since my sister's death. We're an upper-middle-class family. Over the last couple of years, my parents have frequently gone on vacations. They don't tell me where, and I never ask. I usually just wake up and find out they've left yet again. I'm out of high school now, and I have no career path yet. I've only really had one thing on my mind since I remembered what killed Jenny. Now I'm returning to the forest where she died. Now I'm going to go after the thing that killed her. I've been preparing for this, and if it is a Wendigo like I've suspected, then I'm more than ready to take my revenge. This is how I'm doing it. I took a lift again. Had the driver known what I was carrying in my bags, I doubt they would have let me in. As I sat there, the realization of what I was doing grew heavily on me. What the hell am I doing? I've been talking myself up for the last couple of years. As much as I want a glorious victory, the closer I've come to this day, the more I daydream about dying the same way Jenny did. As angry as I am with my parents, I don't think they deserve to lose their only remaining child. But I just can't move on knowing that thing is still out there. My legs were as dense as gold once I tried to exit the cab. The driver watched awkwardly as I struggled to pull myself out while putting on my backpack and working to carry the other supplies. Why was I doing this alone? I don't want anyone else getting hurt in this, I think was my reasoning. But God, I wish I wasn't out here doing this alone. With each step I took into the forest, the more the terror numbed. I was in the domain of the Wendigo now. I wasn't entirely sure how much of the information about them was real. I knew they could change their appearance. I know that their true form is just like the drawings people have made. There's no way to be an expert on these things unless you've actually dealt with one. I'm still not sure why it decided not to come after me. Based on its size, I doubt it would have had any difficulty. Instead, I'm still alive and crazy enough to come back and pick a fight. As I set up camp, I found myself jumping at the sound of any bird call or movement from a nearby animal. The way I hammered in my tent, I knew I was calling attention to myself. In my left pants pocket was a gun. Like werewolves, I'd heard that silver bullets were necessary to kill Wendigos. What if I'm wrong? The thought had been with me ever since I'd stepped foot back into these woods. I stopped frequently while setting up. Behind nearby tree, I was almost certain I could see someone watching me and then hiding behind it again. I didn't bother to walk over and check it out. I finished up my tent and made up my sleeping bag inside. As I did this, I heard calls that sounded almost human off in the distance. It probably knew I was here. The minutes went by slowly, but soon dusk set upon the forest. I built a fire like the one Jenny and I had made. I roasted 2 marshmallows. Despite her absence, I made a s'more for her as well, resting it on a sizable rock near the fire. As I ate it, I thought about our last night together. All things considered, it was pleasant. Being twins, we had moments where we'd gotten into arguments like our parents. We'd fought one another. We had our problems. But that night had been pleasant. I'd actually been glad we decided to camp without our parents. As frightened as I still was, I felt a warmth not from the fire. A sense of calm overcame me as my memories were suddenly flooded with the good times Jenny and I had. The good times were not for long. I could hear footsteps not far behind me. Jeremy. I could never forget that voice. It sounded just like Jenny, but I knew it wasn't her. For some reason, I felt compelled to sit there calmly. As it approached, I could tell it was going over to take a seat at the rock where I'd left the S-more. I glanced delicately to my right. I watched as a figure that looked almost identical to the Jenny I remembered pick up the S-more and take a bite. "That's not yours." I surprised myself blurting that out. The fake Jenny ignored me, continuing to scarf it down. My terror turned to anger. The thing responsible for my sister's death was standing right next to me, mocking my grief. I didn't wait for it to finish. I pulled out my gun and pointed it directly at the figure. Before I could fire, the creature jumped to the left and turned around. I was struck with paralysis when I saw the mutilated face of my sister's corpse staring back at me. "I'm trapped, Jeremy." I struggled to keep aim. How dare that thing pretend to be her? It won't let me go. And it won't let you go either. We can be together again. It's so much nicer than going home to an empty house and unloving parents. She held her hand out to me. "Trust me, brother. Please." My trigger finger felt as though struck with a serious case of arthritis. Jenny took a step towards me. Wait, no. It's not Jenny. Why did I suddenly forget that? Feed the forest with me, Jeremy. It's so much better being dead. PR, prove it. At last I pulled the trigger. The creature hollered in pain as it fell to the ground. I'd hit a lung, which wouldn't be enough. I aimed the gun at its heart, but failed to pull the trigger as it rolled over and jumped back to its feet. Within seconds, it transformed from a corpse of my sister to its massive dark skeletal form with massive antlers. My mind was caught between fight and flight. I stood there aiming my gun, but desperately wanted to flee. As it rushed towards me, I chose the later option. I rushed over to the bag I'd left near the tent. Inside was a weapon I'd built myself. As I rushed over, I could tell I wasn't going to be able to outrun it. I fired another shot. The bullet lodged itself inside the neck of the beast. It cried out once more, buying me a bit of time to get to the bag. Why did I have it zipped up? As I tried to open it, the Wendigo rushed towards me again. Just like on the day of Jenny's death, I ran from the campsite, further into the forest. History was repeating itself. I was going to fail to avenge my sister. My parents were going to lose their last remaining child, all because I couldn't let this go. After at least several minutes, I'd somehow managed to keep outrunning it. I refused to slow down and look behind my shoulder. As I kept running, I noticed that I'd gone in some sort of circle. Up ahead of me was the campsite. I had a chance to grab the bag and pulled out the weapon. The closer I came to the campsite, the louder the Wendigo's footsteps became. I could almost feel the wind as the creature tried to claw at me. Once I reached the campsite, I put my hand out, clutching the bag. It felt like almost too great a risk to put my gun back in my pocket, but I needed free to pull out the weapon. I managed to do just that and used my left hand to pull out a long metal spike. I'd built it in such a way as to have the spike shoot out at the push of a button. The Wendigo wasn't going to slow down until it had me. I had no choice. I had to turn around. I had to have perfect timing. I had to collect my debt from the creature that took my twin sister. Chew on this, you son of a bitch. I turned around, pressing the button that shot the spike out. Less than a foot from my face was the Wendigo, its cry so loud my ears hurt and began to ring. I'd done it. The spike had pierced the heart. Silver. Weakly, the Wendigo tried to swipe at me, but somehow lacked the strength. The next part was a gamble. I pulled out my gun and shot it in the head. It wasn't going to be enough to end the Wendigo assuming what I'd read up was correct. I rushed back over to where I'd dropped my bag. Inside was a silver axe I'd also designed myself. When I returned, the creature was still conscious, letting out continuous agonizing cries. I felt no sympathy. I hacked away at its wrists first. Its claws were the biggest threat, and I wanted them gone. Despite the weightlifting I'd been doing, it took over a dozen hacks to remove the first long-fingered hand. I pulled out my gun and shot it again in the head. It subdued the creature long enough for me to remove the second hand, and then I began on its head. As it began waking up again, I found myself screaming at the creature. I demanded it stay dead, calling it every insulting name that came to mind. Once I'd hacked most of the way through its head, I pulled it off. I kicked it a couple of feet away. The Wendigo no longer moved. It took over an hour, but I'd managed to put each limb, the head, and torso in the trash bags I'd brought along. One by one, I carried them back to the campsite. I lit another fire, burning each bag. It took until dawn for me to burn the body. I left the torso for last. It was a struggle, but I managed to remove the heart, rip it to pieces, and placed it in a silver box. After locking it, I looked around the site and decided to leave everything except my gun and the box behind. I was never particularly religious, but in the months leading up to my fight, I'd gotten to know a priest at a church in my area called Street Alphonsus. Luckily for me, he was there when I arrived with the silver box. His face went several shades paler when I showed it to him. Nevertheless, he escorted me to the back of the church with a pair of shovels and helped me bury it. Once done, I sat there, suddenly flooded with overwhelming emotions. I did it. The Wendigo had been slain. I'd done it. My sister's killer was dead. Its body was burned, its heart in pieces and buried. Jenny, I cried out. I kept my promise. I killed it. The Wendigo can't get anyone else. It won't kill anyone else. I placed my lowered head in my hands and continued to cry. I'm sorry I wasn't braver before, I whimpered. I'm so sorry I wasn't stronger before. I placed some flowers on my sister's grave an hour later. I talked of her tombstone as though she was there listening. I'd like to believe she was, and that she was pleased with my accomplishment. Afterwards, I returned home and slept through the day and all night. Once morning came, I heard some noise downstairs. I went down to see that my parents were home and sitting down to breakfast. They stopped and looked over at me, saying nothing. I walked over and pulled up a seat. I had no appetite at all. How was your trip? Where did you guys go? My parents exchanged looks before my father replied. We went out west to visit your aunt and uncle. Did you, enjoy it? I had difficulty keeping my chin from quivering as I lowered my head again. Jeremy, sweetie, what's wrong? Both my mother and my father got up and came over to me. Why do you keep leaving me alone? God damn it. I'm the only kid you have left. Don't you give a fuck about me? They hugged me tightly, offering apologies. I could have sworn I felt another pair of hands on my shoulders. Their light touch was the most comforting of all. I really hope Jenny is proud of me. But a new task was ahead of me now. A harder task, perhaps. I was going to have to figure out how to reconcile with my parents. Our family had been broken long before her death. We'll never be whole again, but I know with some effort we can be better than this. I hope she can continue to give me the strength to put myself together as I progress into adulthood. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm. Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of Horror in Detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Skinwalker horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. What it's really like to be a matured Skinwalker. I tried to jot down all the explanation that came to my mind last night, and rereading it made me realize it was oddly difficult for others to understand. So perhaps this time I would start the story way back when I was first born and work my story up to now, as a not-so-human human. I'm a Skinwalker, or I figure that's what I'm called. Yep, that scary folklore kind of Skinwalker. First, let's clarify. No, we are not dogs with no tail or guys who walk on fours. We are not witches. We are not, once human, either. What you have read and watched online are lies, adaptations, and exaggerated versions of skinwalkers during our early state of development. Think of a toddler learning to walk and talk. Being a dog, a fish, a deer, a bird, half a bird, or even the first few humans was our toddler phase. We were learning to mimic. I was born a spherical, fleshy core the size of a pea, with an eye, a tail, and a mouth. A round red lump of tadpole red meat creature capable of seeing, eating, and doing some extraordinary things to survive. It is hard to have one word that describes what skinwalkers do as infants. In fact, I don't think we even have a word for that. So I will try to break it down so everyone can understand the step-by-step process of us growing up. As a baby, I was durable and animalistic. I had a strong tail that allowed me to spring and jump like crickets, but it was instinct not to jump, as it requires energy to do so, and as a newborn you don't have the luxury of carbs. We were vicious, opportunistic hunters, and we had our foul odor to attract the first prey. Unlike other tadpoles who started underwater and preyed on fish, I started alone on land, probably because of my parents' choice of birthing location. My first prey was a bear cub during warmer season, which I was very proud of. It sounds way cooler to hunt a bear than a fish. I jumped into its nostril as it was sniffing me, then I wiggled my way up to the brain area. Their instinct told me to do three things: eat, copy, replace. I feasted on a small portion of the brain and quickly fell asleep. When I woke up, my first thin layer of protection had already coated my red skinless self, as if the resting time was my body breaking down the structure and chemicals of what I just consumed. It automatically made an exact copy of said portion. There I had my first apartment, inside a bear cub whose brain I gradually ate and replicated until one day I was completely able to control its limbs. Although imitating the movements of other bears was awkward and proven to be an ugly task. The outer layer of myself at that point was the exact size of the bear's real, no longer exists, brain, while my real self, the red tadpole that I was, with an eye and a mouth, was resting peacefully inside, like a snail. Except the fact that I have two shells when you think of it, the bear body itself, and the layer I made that looked and functioned like a bear brain. The bear's head at that point was hollow without me. Soon I learned to behave and hunt salmons like other bears. Soon I learned to shrink and expand my brain shell. Then I learned how to temporarily travel outside of that shell. I would shrink my real body, open a small hole of this brain, and venture south to feast on the spinal bone marrow. It took me days to finally eat all of them and come back up top. Although I was very young, my dexterity allowed me to glue the brain shell to the fake spinal cord that I just made. Soon I realized I no longer had to venture out and use my real mouth to eat. I can consume the bones, muscles, and veins of the bear, as long as it touches my outer layer, the fake brain, and the fake spinal cord. However, the indirect eating process is significantly slower than eating with my mouth, as the enzymes my shell produced were not as concentrated. I gradually ate and faked the bear inside out. Then I learned to soften and harden my bear shell so I could shrink even more, to the point it felt like it was but a thin layer of meat wrapping around my tadpole core. I ate and cloned all the bones and muscles of the bear but left the fat and the skin, as it was nasty to consume. Had I shrunk my shell and left the bear there, it would have been nothing but its skin on the ground. Imagine a skinless, fatless adult brown bear walking around, or half of that imagery walking around. The tales of skinwalkers being dogs with no lower half, deer with no tail, humans who walk on fours probably stemmed from there. People saw our very first attempts to mimic living creatures, and we weren't so masterful at disguising. Again, we were toddlers. I didn't leave the bear and venture out as a skinless monstrosity, though. I lived in my comfortable home for a long while, until one day I smacked a domestic dog unconscious at night. I shrank all of myself as much as possible and left the deflated bear via its mouth. I grew from the size of a pea to a kidney bean before I left. I then wiggled my way to the dog's brain through its mouth. There I ate the brain within hours of the night. However, in the middle of my feasting poured in a new experience. I'd call it not food-related good memories. At first it was foreign and shocking to me, for I ate the bear's brain since it was a young cub. My entire memory as the bear was simply the joy of me eating salmons and berries. But when I was in this dog, it was something else. Joy and happiness that weren't associated with food, but with a foreign creature that was significantly taller than me, and in the dog's memories the creature always showed its teeth as if it was trying to eat the dog. I learned that showing teeth means aggression behavior back when I was a bear, because that was what older bears did. They tried to scare each other with their teeth. I thought this creature, the human, was trying to eat me, the dog, but at the same time the dog itself associated that aggression with joy. As a baby skinwalker, I didn't know shifting from one species to another would be such a challenge. And that was 11 years ago. I'm a male human host now, and I don't need to eat anymore, if not at all. I only eat to maintain the host's body. I don't take over people for the sake of comfort eating either. I only eat when I need a new identity. I don't eat their brain completely like I used to do, because doing so will kill the host immediately once I leave them. I learned that the hard way. I often have sex with the next potential host, and while they're sleeping together, I leave the worn-out home for a new journey. And yes, skinwalkers can sense each other. We can also kill if we want to, but challenging mankind is not our interest. We just want to survive and thrive as a species. It's no use trying to irritate the host. Second story. The Singing Skinwalker. This story was told to me by one of my good friends, who's of Navajo descent on her father's side. It happened several years ago, when she was spending the last 2 weeks of summer visiting relatives on a reservation in New Mexico, and is by far one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. My friend, Jessie, was 12 at the time and playing outside with her cousins. They were tossing a frisbee around, and one of the younger kids threw it too hard. It flew over the fence and was swallowed up by a small grove of parched bur oak trees. Jessie, being the eldest, went to retrieve it, leaving her 11-year-old cousin Ellie in charge until she got back. The sun was setting, lighting up the sky in brilliant shades of orange, as Jessie made her way over to the grove. After some poking around, she found the frisbee caught in one of the tree's branches. As she climbed, she began to sing an old Navajo song, but paused when her body suddenly went cold. That's exactly how Jessie described it to me, cold, as if she'd been dunked in ice water. You know that annoying, scary story cliche of feeling like you're being watched? Well, it's only cliche because it's true. Jessie could feel a pair of eyes following her even when she looked around her and saw nothing. Seriously creeped out, she grabbed the frisbee and ran back to her grandmother's house, just in time to see the old woman step onto the porch and call for the kids to come inside. The true horror didn't start until several hours later. Jessie, her cousin Ellie, and Ellie's little sister Clara were asleep in their grandmother's guest room when Jessie woke up to the strangest sound she'd ever heard. She described it to me as a cross between radio static and the noise an old movie reel makes. At first, it sounded distant, but after a minute or two, Jessie realized it was getting closer. Beside her, Ellie rolled over and muttered, "What is that?" "Don't know," Jessie whispered. The girls waited, holding their collective breath. By now, the sound was right outside the window, and Jessie realized it was singing. At this point in her retelling of the story, Jessie went white and began glancing over her shoulder. She told me the song was the exact same one she'd been singing in the tree grove earlier. It sounded so wrong, she said, rubbing her arms as if a cold breeze had rushed by her. Remember when we listened to that clip of the very first recording of a human voice? How weird it sounded. When I nodded, Jesse added, "It was like that, but a little clearer." Somehow, that made it even worse. Jesse and Ellie were both terrified, while Clara, unaware, slept on. Through the thin blue curtain over the window, they could see the dark shadow of something peering in at them. To this day, Jessie can't explain what motivated her to get up and see for herself, since she was scared shitless. Ignoring Ellie's protests, she slid out of bed and walked across the room on shaky legs. As soon as she drew back the curtain, she regretted her decision. Staring back at her was the most horrifying creature she had ever seen. It had the head of an emaciated deer, with antlers like dead tree branches and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the faint silver moonlight. It had a scrawny humanoid body with abnormally long arms and legs, and as Jessie stood there, caught in its hideous gaze, it raised a clawed hand and scratched at the window with a horrible screeching sound that made Jessie's skin crawl. It was Ellie's scream that jolted Jessie out of her terrified stupor. She stumbled back from the window and landed on the carpeted floor. Clara woke up and began screaming too. Then their grandmother ran in and turned on the light. The thing at the window had vanished, leaving behind 3 long scratches in the glass and 3 terrified little girls. Jessie's grandmother managed to calm the hysterical children enough so they could tell her what had happened. As she listened, her age-weathered face became progressively paler. She hustled the girls downstairs to the living room and made up a bed for them on the couch. She then sat by them all night, and whenever one of them asked her what was going on, the old woman simply shook her head. Needless to say, Jessie and her cousins didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jessie's grandmother announced that everyone was to stay inside that day. No arguments. She looked so shaken nobody dared protest. Around noon, she called for a medicine woman to come and bless the house. Later, after the woman left, Jessie marched into the kitchen where her grandmother was loading the dishwasher. "Tell me what that thing was," she said bluntly. Her grandmother sighed and motioned for Jessie to sit down. "You have heard the legend of the Skinwalkers, yes?" Jessie frowned and nodded, vaguely recalling the story. "So that was a skinwalker?" Her grandmother nodded. "Yes." "Grandma," said Jessie as a light dawned, "I think it overheard me singing in the tree grove yesterday." Her grandmother's dark eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because it was singing that same song. You know, the lullaby you used to sing to me when I was little." Her grandmother was silent for a long time before whispering, "You are a very lucky girl, Jessica, but luck has its limits. From now on, you must be more careful." The look in the old woman's eyes as she spoke those words still haunts Jessie to this day. As I said earlier, that was years ago, 7, to be specific. Jessie has returned to the reservation many times, each without incident, but she has never set foot in that tree grove again, and probably never will. Jessie's grandmother died this past March, at the age of 87, and Jessie later moved in with her aunt for the summer so she could help clean up the old house, which the family was going to rent out. She had been there for about a week when I went down there to visit her. On my first night, we sat on the porch and drank some beers, and I found my eyes drifting towards the tree grove. "So that's where it all happened?" Jessie shuddered and nodded. "Yep. Tomorrow, I'm taking you to the medicine woman and have her bless you." "Is that really necessary?" The look Jessie gave me nearly turned me to stone. "You think nothing will happen to you because you're white. But when you're in Navajo territory, you're in Skinwalker territory. Take caution." I nodded. "Yes." That night, I swore I heard radio static outside the house. When I brought it up to Jessie the next morning, she didn't speak, but grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the medicine woman, where I was blessed. Nothing happened for the rest of the trip, and I went back to the city unscathed. I didn't post this here with the intention of teaching a moral, but I suppose if there is something to be learned from the story of the singing skinwalker, it's that there are things out there we can't explain. The look in Jessie's eyes when she recounted her experience told me everything I need to know. What she saw truly horrified her, and all I can say is, I'm grateful I didn't have to go through it myself. Third story. There's a skinwalker in my neighborhood. I had heard of skinwalkers before, but always just assumed they were the Native American version of werewolves, so I never gave them much thought. Until last week when one of the co-workers at my new job told me that they were his most feared folklore creatures. He's originally from Utah, so that makes sense. He suggested some YouTube videos to watch on the subject, and after work that night I binged about 4 or 5 of the videos. I totally understand his stance on them now. I live in rural South Carolina, so to be completely honest, I wasn't too worried about the possibility of running into one. My coworker told me that they're basically a Midwestern thing. I'd be more worried about Wendigos if I were you. He joked the day after I watched the videos. We had a good chat about skinwalkers and Wendigos during our shift and just reveled in the creepiness of them. I mentioned how one of the tales said that the more you talk about skinwalkers, the more they're drawn to you, and he made sarcastic ghost noises to keep the mood light. That night I showed the videos to my fiancée. She was way more creeped out than I was. I became kind of obsessed. I love scary things and couldn't help but watch every video I came across. I discussed skinwalkers with my other horror enthusiast friends, looked up skinwalker art, read true skinwalker stories on Reddit, just to head first into all things skinwalker. This went on for a few days until I started feeling a little burned out on the subject. I live in a fairly nice neighborhood where all the houses are on one side of the street. On the other side is property that used to belong to the local elementary school. The building is on the next street over, so basically it was like the school's backyard or whatever. The school shut down about 30 or 40 years ago, and the county just let nature reclaim them. So directly across from my house is an old chain-link fence and just overgrown woods. 2 nights ago, while I was smoking a cigarette, I heard leaves rustling across the street. I didn't bother looking up from my phone. I live across from woods. It was probably a deer. The rustling stopped, then started again, and it sounded like whatever was over there was running back and forth along the fence line, panting like a dog. This caught my attention. There had been a few rabies cases in my town 2 months back, so a strange dog running around in the middle of the night was definitely something I'd want to keep an eye on. I look up from my phone in the direction of the sounds, and they just stop. It was like the thing knew I noticed it. I strained my eyes trying to see what it was, but it was obscured by the overgrowth. I didn't look away. Must have stared at the spot for at least a minute. It didn't make another sound, didn't move again, so I knew it was still there. A chill ran down my spine, and I began thinking of every skinwalker video I had watched over the last week, and I felt sick to my stomach. I quickly put out my cigarette and went inside. The next morning, I took my dog out for a short walk. She's a pugzoo named Honey and is like my child. Me and my fiancé taught her that pee-pee poop means it's time to go outside to potty. It's the cutest thing. Anyway, this particular morning I take her out to the front yard to do her business. She pees and then walks around sniffing for about 5 minutes before walking to the side of the street and sitting down. She's never done this before, so I was a little annoyed. I tugged on her leash lightly and tried to coax her back toward the house. Come on, honey. Gotta poo-poo. She didn't budge. This dog could be stubborn sometimes, but this was something else. She tugged back against the leash and just stared across the street, sniffing the air occasionally. It was then that I realized she was staring at the exact spot that I heard the thing the night before. I got goosebumps and I quickly picked her up and began walking back to the house. As I got closer, I noticed something on the ground by my front steps. It was one of the Halloween decorations my fiancé had hung up on our house. Plastic black roses with plastic eyeballs and spiders on them. The stems were wire so they can be wrapped around things to keep them secured. This flower was torn apart. Something had come onto my porch, taken down the flower, and torn it apart, leaving it lying in front of my steps. I picked up the flower and threw it away. I didn't tell my fiancée. I didn't want her freaking out. The rest of that day went by uneventfully. That night, I told my coworker about what happened, and he looked a little concerned but brushed it off. Said what I heard was most likely just a dog and the flower was probably knocked down by the wind. I had my doubts. As I was walking to my door after getting home from work last night, I heard that same panting as the night before, and the clicking of claws against asphalt. I turned quickly to see a dog that looked like a brown mangy bull terrier hauling ass down my street. The street is probably about 40 feet away from my front porch, so I couldn't get a great look at it, but I could tell it was only running on 3 legs because one looked mangled. It turned quickly and darted into the tree line across the street through a part of the fence that had been pulled back. The fence wasn't like that earlier that day. That's when I noticed that the dog didn't have a tail. I almost threw up. Skinwalker legends say that when they take the form of an animal, they never have tails. I tried to rationalize it to myself. Maybe it just had a stub tail that I missed because it was running. I immediately went inside. My fiancée was sitting on the couch petting Honey. She could see I was upset and asked me what was wrong. I told her nothing, just almost got clipped by a car before I pulled into the driveway. She got up, hugged me, and cursed the person that almost hit me. She asked me if I could take Honey out for pee-pee poo-poo because she had been creeped out by all the spooky videos we've been watching and didn't feel comfortable going outside at night by herself. Honey perked up. She ran to the door and looked between me and the door, whining excitedly. I stared down at her for a moment before agreeing to it. I'll just keep her close to the porch, I thought. We walked off the porch and she immediately tried to walk to the street. I tugged on the leash and she tugged back. She eventually moseyed to the edge of the porch and peed. After, she began walking around sniffing. I told her the usual line. Come on, Honey. Got a poo-poo. She huffed at me, sniffed around some more, and eventually started pooping. I was on edge the entire time we were outside, but being around her helped calm me down a little. Then I heard it from across the street. Come on, Honey. My voice, in the exact same tone and inflection as I had just said it. It sounded staticky, like an old radio broadcast, but it was definitely my voice. Honey stopped what she was doing and stood alert. She looked over to me and cocked her head. Come on, Honey. Got a poo-poo. Again my voice called from across the street. Honey began whining, looking for me to the woods across the street. I picked her up and began backing up to the steps, not taking my eyes off the part of the fence that had been pulled back. Honey, come. The voice sounded firm now, like it was getting aggravated. Honey squirmed in my arms, whining. I didn't know if she was trying to get out to go to the voice or to run inside, but I wasn't taking any chances. I turned and bolted up the steps into the door. As I walked inside, I turned one last time to look across the street. There, standing in the part of the fence that was pulled back, was the dog. Its eyes were glowing a dull orange, and it had its teeth bared. The face was all wrong, like someone had taken a distortion tool and just dragged around random features. Once again, I didn't tell my fiancée. Stupid horror movie cliché shit, I know. But I really don't want her losing her shit. I just told her there's a strange dog running around the neighborhood, so to not take Honey out at night. Later last night, after we had gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth outside my window. Against my better judgment, I rolled over to try and see it. I don't, but the pacing stops. "Come on, honey," my voice called out, cutting through the quiet of the night. I prayed my fiancé didn't hear. It called out 2 more times before I heard it walking away. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. Today, when I get to work, I'm going to ask my coworker what I can do to get rid of this thing. I'm scared. I don't think there's a way. If anyone knows anything, please let me know. 4th story. The Wolf at SKINWALKER Ranch. My wife and I were sitting on the front porch after a long day of moving furniture and boxes into our new house. We were tired, red-faced, and sweating after sharing the burden between the 2 of us. The sun was setting on the horizon as we sipped our warm beers and looked out over the landscape of our newly acquired ranch. Fields stretched off into the distance as far as the eye could see, not a neighbor in sight for miles. The cows were grazing, looking unhappy, their tails hanging straight down as they ignored the fresh grass all around them. I figured they were just upset from the long move. "Why do you think they needed so many locks?" my wife asked, taking a sip of her beer. It was the elephant in the room, so to speak, and I had to admit I was curious about it as well. Every door in the house had a deadbolt on it, inside and out. Not only that, but the windows were shielded by thick iron bars. The old owners had left long before we could ask them about it. The folks who lived here before were probably paranoid about home invasions so far from the city. "We'll take them down and I'll fill the screw holes with wood putty. We'll paint them over and they'll be good as new. You wanted to redo the trim anyway. And the bars on the windows? That'll take a bit more work, but I can get it done before the weekend. I'll just have to run over to the hardware store to grab a few things. I can't find some of my tools. Maybe they got lost during the move." My wife was no longer paying attention. She was staring at some point far off in the distance. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. I followed her finger and looked to see a large gray wolf moving in the fields. It seemed to be stalking deliberately toward us, marching at a steady, quick pace. It came to a fence and did the strangest thing. Instead of leaping over it or burrowing under it, as I'd expected, it stood up on 2 legs like a person, grasped the loose corner of the wire fencing, and pulled it up, ducking between the strands and stepping through, one leg after the other. It was exactly how I would have done it. Once it was on the other side, it went back on 4 legs and started its progress toward us again. Then it looked up and saw us staring at it. The gray wolf stayed still for a few seconds, then disappeared in the tall grass suddenly. It was just gone. It didn't dive into the grass or duck down. It was there, and then a moment later it was just gone. Vanished in the blink of an eye. The 2 of us sat uneasily on the porch, and I stood up to look in the distance, trying to spot the creature. But it was nowhere to be found. "I'm going inside." "You should come too," my wife said, sounding nervous. We went in and locked the doors at the front and back of the house. The bars stayed on the windows after that, and my wife didn't mention the deadbolts on the doors in the house again either. The 2 of us went to bed that night with little talk between us, a big difference from the ecstatic chatter that had been the norm all day prior to the event with the wolf. Or whatever that thing was. I got the feeling wolf was not quite the right word. That night something else even more disturbing happened to us both. I woke up in the early hours of the morning, around 3:30 a.m. according to the bedside alarm clock. When I looked next to me in the bed and saw my wife's spot was empty, I became immediately concerned for her safety. Where could she have gone at this time of night? I wondered. That was when I heard her voice calling to me from outside the window, asking insistently for me to let her in. Her cries for help were muffled through the glass, and I lifted the heavy old window pane up to hear her better. "What are you doing out there?" I asked, worried about the wolf we'd seen earlier. I was looking around for glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight nearby. Standing on 2 legs or 4, I wasn't sure which to expect. "I must have been sleepwalking," she said dreamily. The front door locked behind me somehow. You have to let me back in. Please. It's cold out here. I'll be right down, I said, without thinking about how impossible all of that was. I was only concerned for her safety at that moment, and she had been known to sleepwalk occasionally, so that part seemed to make sense. I raced down the stairs in my boxers and grasped the front door knob in my hand, turning it. Thankfully, it was locked, or who knows what might have happened. Reaching up to turn the lock, I was startled to hear a voice behind me. "What are you doing?" my wife asked. I jumped at the sound, my heartbeat quickening. But what terrified me even more was what I had just seen outside. Given the time frame it had taken me to get downstairs, it was impossible that it had been her. It was like someone else had been out there, wearing her skin and speaking in her voice. Looking at the woman standing in front of me, I had no doubt it was Christine, my wife. Panting, I walked over to her and hugged her tightly. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't answer, afraid she would think I was losing my mind. Some things we don't share with anyone, not even our significant others. We take them to our grave, afraid that if we speak of them out loud it will make them true, and it will make the source of the impossible things return. So instead I just took her hand and led her up the stairs, looking back nervously over my shoulder at the front door, waiting for the sound of a key turning in the lock, or the sound of it being broken down by powerful forces beyond my control. Instead, there was a gentle knock, polite almost at first, but then the fist began to pound against the front door of the house louder and louder, more and more insistently. My wife stopped, turning around to look at me on the stairs. "Who could that be at this time of night?" she asked. "Just ignore it. Let's go to bed. They'll go away, eventually." After a few moments of hesitation, she turned around and began going up the stairs once more, taking a couple nervous looks back as she did. We kept walking up the stairs as the pounding continued, devolving into steady scratching noises that didn't cease until daybreak. "What were you doing down in the basement last night?" my wife asked at the breakfast table the next morning. Neither one of us mentioned the sounds at the door the night before. We were both trying to act like it had never happened. In the light of the morning, it seemed like a shared hallucination. A bad dream brought on by warm beer and too much time spent moving boxes without enough assistance. "In the basement?" "I wasn't in the basement," I told her. "Yeah, you were. You were calling my name, asking me to come down there." I looked at her with concern. "When was this?" "Right before I found you at the front door. I figured I just missed you, that you found whatever you were looking for down in the basement and went into the kitchen for a snack or something. But then I found you by the front door. I was never in the basement last night." She looked at me, puzzled. "Of course you were. Who else would have been calling for me from down there?" I debated telling her what I had seen outside and decided I probably should. We were clearly dealing with something very strange here, and we needed to be on the same team if we were going to figure it out. "Christine, did you go outside at all last night?" "No." "What does that have to do with Dash?" "Okay. So, here's the thing. I saw you outside. At the same time when you were going down to the basement, you were calling to me from out front, saying you had been sleepwalking and you were locked out. That's why I was at the door. I never went down to the basement, and I don't think that was really you outside, either. I think there's something else causing all this to happen." "What the hell could cause that to happen?" I opened my mouth to answer when there was a polite rapping at the door. The two of us sat dead silent for a few moments, unsure what to do. The knocking came again, and I heard a man's voice, muffled through the door, saying, "There's a car here. Maybe they're out in the fields. Should we just leave it on the doorstep?" A woman's voice asked. "I don't like being here any more than you do, but that seems a bit rude. Maybe we should come back." Christine and I both stood up, sensing that this was not the same entity from the night before. I don't know how I could tell, but I just could. This wasn't an evil presence, it was just some neighbors coming by to welcome us. And they sounded like they might know something more than we did about the ranch and its mysteries. I opened the front door and saw a man and woman with their backs turned, walking away from us. They spun around when they heard the sound of us opening up. "Oh, hi there. We're the Turnbulls. We live down the road. Technically next door, as if there is such a thing out here. But we do share an easement with you to access the river. Jack takes the cattle down that way sometimes for a change of scenery." The man put his arm around his wife's shoulder and whispered something in her ear. She abruptly stopped talking, realizing that she was rambling on nervously. "Sharon, I'm sure they don't want to get into all that. We just wanted to stop by and welcome you to the neighborhood, so to speak. It's nice to have another couple living next door again. This place has been empty for so long." My wife and I looked at each other with surprise. As far as we knew, the place had been occupied right up until our arrival. It hadn't shown signs of disrepair or neglect, so we'd had no reason to think otherwise. Really? No wonder the place was such a bargain. How long was it empty for? The man and woman shared a look. "Oh, not that long. A few years. Anyways, we just wanted to bring this casserole. We have a few errands to run, but it was great meeting you both. Come on by our place anytime. We're number 56981. The next driveway on your side. Up that way," the man said, hooking his thumb eastward. I had never seen anyone introduce themselves and run so quickly. I tried not to take it personally. "It was so nice to meet you both," the woman said, taking a few quick steps towards my wife and handing her the casserole dish. "You can keep that dish, by the way. It's Pyrex. Great for casseroles." She backed up to join her husband, looking around the property nervously as she did. "Hey, can I ask you something?" The two of them looked ready to run back to their car, but they stopped and nodded, shifting on their feet anxiously and waiting for me to speak. "Have you ever seen anything?" How should I put this? There's been a couple weird occurrences since we moved in, and I was just wondering if you could tell us anything. Is this place haunted? Is that why it was so cheap? I can tell you guys are nervous. Just give us something to work with. Please. We're getting a little freaked out." The woman looked pleadingly at her husband. He nodded to her, and she went back to the car and got in the passenger seat where she sat darting her eyes around from side to side. "What exactly did you see?" the man asked. "Wait, no. Don't tell me. It's better if we don't speak of them. They know when you talk about them. It's better if we don't." "Well then, how do we get rid of them?" "You don't. These things have been around a lot longer than you or me. My wife and I get our share of strange events on the ranch next door too, but not as bad as here. This place. Well, there's something here that makes it special. And not in a good way, I'm sorry to say. I'd tell you more, but it would only make things worse. It always does." There was a sound of knuckles rapping against the glass, and I looked to see his wife banging on the car window, looking with wide eyes at us and pointing into the distance, towards the fields. My eyes followed where she was pointing, and I looked to see the large gray wolf was back, and it was moving towards us again. "I told you, we're not meant to speak of them. I need to go. The two of you should decide soon if you want to stay. This place will change you, and it will take things from you. You only get so long to decide. If you wait to see what the changes will be, it will already be too late. Trust me." With that, he turned away and went back to his car. He started the engine and drove off much quicker than I would have thought, safe on the dirt driveway, swerving and leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air around us, obstructing my view for a few seconds. When I turned around again, the wolf was much, much closer. It was about 50 yards away and closing in fast. It was looking at me intently. My wife was running back towards the house, yelling at me to come, but I was frozen, watching the wolf as it stood on its hind legs again. Not a wolf. Stop calling it a wolf. It's not a wolf. It's just trying to fool you into thinking that's what it is. But it's so much more dangerous than that. I tried to take a step, but my legs wouldn't budge. My eyes were locked on the wolf as it began to stalk towards me, no longer an animal, but something else wearing an animal suit. The ancient leathery-skinned humanoid beneath the wolf armor could be glimpsed occasionally as it strode like a hunter in my direction, taking long steps, moving low to the ground. The fur pieces were simply strapped onto it like clothing, the wolf head strapped on like a hat. "What are you doing? Get in here." My wife yelled one more time, and my foot suddenly started to move. As soon as it did, I found I was unfrozen and finally able to start running, and not a second too soon. The house was close, but the thing was fast. When it saw me beginning to run, it became a wolf again in an instant. The idea that it was anything but that seemed ludicrous as I watched it race towards me on all fours, its snapping jaws dripping saliva as it dove to cut me off. This thing was a massive gray wolf, through and through. It could be nothing but that. And yet my eyes had begged otherwise just a moment before. If not for my wife, it might have gotten me. But she saw what was happening and took a large rock we had been using as a doorstop and threw it straight at the thing's head. It missed, hitting the beast in the shoulder instead, but it was enough to drive it back for a brief second, which was all I needed. I ran into the house and slammed the door shut behind me. An instant later, the scratching began again. Soon there was another one at the back door, scratching it as well. The sounds continued for hours. When the noises stopped and I finally ventured outside again, I found that 3 of the cattle had been killed. The others were scared out of their wits, hiding huddled together in a corner of the field near to the house. Their eyes darted around the fields, reminding me of how the neighbors had looked as they scanned our property for the things lurking in the shadows. I was beginning to suspect we were not going to be able to stay in this place much longer. Even if we could survive, this was no way to live. That night, my wife and I sat in the living room with all the blinds and curtains drawn, discussing what we would do. The house wouldn't sell quickly, that much was obvious based on the neighbors' statements. The 2 of us decided we would leave in the morning, regardless. We would stay in a motel until we found an apartment to rent, sacrificing all of our investment in the house. Even if we put it up for sale again, it would be a long time before we made any portion of our money back. But it was too dangerous and too terrifying to stay. "I'm going to bed," my wife said, looking tired. "Come upstairs soon, okay? I don't want to be alone." "I'll be up in a minute," I told her. "I just want to grab a glass of water." She nodded sleepily and went up the stairs slowly, looking depressed. We had dreamed about this move for so long, and now it was all coming to ruins. I felt sad about it too. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. After drinking it down in one long gulp, I decided I needed another. It had been a long day, and I'd been too distracted to drink anything. A noise came from upstairs, a scraping sound like claws. Setting down the glass, I turned around and listened closely. "Christine?" She didn't reply. I took a few steps across the linoleum floor of the kitchen before calling out again. Once again, there was no answer. By the time I got to the bottom of the stairs, my heart was pounding so fast and hard I felt like it would beat right out of my chest. I opened my mouth to call her name one more time when I saw it. The wolf that wasn't a wolf strode on 2 legs across the gap at the top of the stairs, then disappeared around the corner, heading towards my wife. It was so quick that I thought for a moment I could have imagined it. Just a gray blur that was gone in an instant. If not for the fact that it looked down the stairs at me and smiled, its long canines gleaming in the light. Its eyes were pure blackness. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, terrified of what it would do to her. When I got to the second floor, I looked down the hall to see all of the doors were closed. It was as if the whole thing had really been just my imagination. Taking an unsteady step towards the bedroom, my heartbeat did not slow down even slightly. My hand was shaking as I reached for the door knob, turning it and entering the master bedroom. I entered hesitantly, finding the room dark and my wife asleep in bed. Part of me wanted to wake her up, but for some reason I didn't. "It will be fine. Just go to bed," my irrational thoughts said. My pounding heart began to slow and my eyelids grew heavy. "This is fine," my mind told me. "Everything is fine. Just go to sleep now." Trying not to think of what I had seen just moments before, I climbed into bed, getting in next to my wife and shivering while my body warmed up beneath the sheets. There was a soft sound of padding footsteps outside the bedroom door. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Something wants to get inside the bedroom. And a strange, foreign voice in my mind is telling me to let it in. Fifth story. I think I had a run-in with a skinwalker last night, and I'm afraid it might come back. This entire thing happened last night, and I still don't know how to feel about it. I'm honestly still shaken up. I'm afraid that my dogs might get hurt, or even my family. So I've come here in search of advice as to what I should do now. It must have happened around 8-ish, when my mom's girlfriend called me downstairs. She had asked me to help her burn some of the boxes we had lying around in the kitchen so we could clear up some space. We live in a pretty small house, 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom for 5 people. I have 2 younger sisters, one I share a room with, 12, and the other, 10, sleeps in the living room most nights, and we live with my mother, her girlfriend, who is very, very mentally ill, mind you, and my dog Kobe, about 2 years old, Valentine, who we've had for 6 years, and they're 3 puppies. So there really isn't a lot of room to go around, and we could use that extra leg room. So I agreed, and we took the boxes out from the house and into the backyard. Our backyard is the biggest in our small neighborhood and is not fenced in. And we are also one of the only houses on the block that has a shed, which is identical to our next-door neighbors. Our driveway reaches over to our shed, and since the yard is open, they both sort of connect. Anyway, while she was breaking said boxes down and lighting them on fire, I'm not permitted to use the lighter. I was putting Kobe out on the chain to use the bathroom. Don't worry, his chain doesn't reach all the way across our yard, and he was far away from the fire. While Valentine is roaming around the yard, the fire goes fine, and we burn about 2 or 3 big boxes with no problems. Everything was very under control, and we were even having fun with it. Around the end of the fire, when the flames had started to fade away, Kobe started running back and forth from the driveway to near where we were, barking frantically and trying very hard to get off of his chain like he was afraid and was warning us of something. When this happened, I also noticed that Valentine was growling in the driveway. So I got up and walked over to him to see what was wrong, and I smiled and asked him, "What's the matter?" in that sort of baby voice. But while I was standing there, I got that feeling. You know, the one where you know you're not alone. I could feel someone's eyes looking right through me. I looked over in the direction of Valentine's barking, and I instinctively yelled, "Oh my God," at what I saw. There was this inhuman-looking thing standing in the driveway only a few feet away from me. Despite having the light from the back door being open and the fire nearby, this thing was completely black. All I could see was its bulging eyes staring right through me, never wavering. It was so thin and tall, standing much taller than the small shed at the end of the driveway, easily 7 feet tall. And God, I could just feel that something was completely off about this thing. Some voice in the back of my head was telling me this thing wants to hurt. It's so angry. And it was like me and this thing were having a staring contest. I heard my mom's girlfriend ask me what was wrong, and I looked away for just a second, and it was gone. completely disappeared, but I could still feel its energy looming around. When I told Mom's girlfriend what happened, we put out the fire and we brought the dogs inside. I ran to my mom and told her the same thing I had told her girlfriend, and she tried to give me logical explanations to what I saw, but none of them really made sense. She must have seen that I was afraid and wanted to comfort me, but her excuses gave me no comfort. After that, I went up to my room with Kobe and I tried to shake off that feeling that thing had left me with, but honestly I couldn't. I was struggling for a while. I stayed up there talking with my boyfriend for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before I heard my mom calling for me from downstairs. Her and her GF had gotten into a fight, and she had locked herself in the bathroom. Mom was fine with it and simply told me to keep an eye on the food while she went to pick up my sisters from their friends' houses. So I said, okay, and went to do so while she left out the front door. Not even 2 minutes later, my mom comes rushing back inside and I hear her walk into the hallway where the bathroom is and say *girlfriend's name*. There's something standing outside watching the house and my heart sank. She finally believed me. So GF comes out from the bathroom and says that she had seen the same thing trying to peek into the windows from the bathroom, and she immediately ran to their room to grab her metal bat and she ran out the back door, screaming, "If anybody's out here, I'll bash your fucking head in," at the top of her lungs. Regardless of the situation, my mom still had to pick up the kids. So I walked her out to the car, then quickly retreated back inside and grabbed a hammer from the closet. Kobe started slamming himself into the back door, screaming bloody murder out of absolutely nowhere. I had never seen him do anything like it before. So reluctantly, I put him on his chain so he could protect the GF while she was on the lookout. While this happened, I hid myself in the bathroom, since it's one of the only rooms in the house with a working lock, and I called my grandma who was at work and told her everything. She's a huge believer in this kind of stuff, just like I am. So she listened to what I had to say and tried to calm me down since I was absolutely losing my shit. I am normally a pretty mature and rational person, but I just felt so unsafe and everything felt off. Just when things started to calm down, the girlfriend comes running into the house and tells me urgently that something had broken the basement window from the outside and she was afraid it had gotten into the house. So I hung up on Grandma after saying goodbye, had 911 on speed dial, and we went to check. Didn't see anybody. Searched around the house and nearby and found nothing. It was like this thing was taunting us. The kids and Mom came back and still things had seemed to cool down, but I could still feel that off and uneasy feeling. Like it wasn't actually gone. Like it was waiting for the right opportunity. Grandma had called me back to say that she would be taking me to her house for the night, as I'm homeschooled unlike my sisters and it wouldn't be an issue. The kids would sleep upstairs with doors locked, Kobe with them, and the hammer I had from before. Grandma came and picked me up after work, and on the way to her house she told me that while I was explaining all this, the hairs on her arms had stood up, and she could feel the negative energy that I was telling her about. Like she knew exactly how I felt when I said something was definitely wrong and unnatural about this thing that was tormenting us. Later on this morning, I got a call from Mom saying that after I left she had invited some friends over to keep her company, ones with conceal and carries, and she had went to grab something from the kitchen, which is where the back door is located. And she heard Kobe's chain rattling outside and something's weight shifting on the back porch right next to the door, when everybody was inside and Kobe was upstairs. I don't know. Laying in bed and thinking about it, I think that this thing was trying to latch itself to the dogs, and that's why Kobe felt the need to be outside. He's been keeping very close to me since I've come home, and I have been very wary about going outside by myself while it's dark. I just came here hoping that someone could offer some sort of advice as to what I should do. I've dealt with paranormal stuff practically my entire life, and this feels completely different. If anybody knows what I should do, please reach out or comment on this post. I'm desperate to protect my family. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.